We have a lot to go over today. I'm very excited about it. So welcome, everyone. Let me explain what's going on today. So, as you know, I had a debate with Daniel Haqiqatjou on if child marriage should be allowed. He did a post-debate review on his channel Thursday. He typically does post-debate reviews, so we were waiting. And so he has a physician on, someone who claims to be a physician. We don't see the guy's face. We don't hear about his credentials other than he's a physician in New York. They claim that I've misrepresented all the research on child marriage, that it is perfectly normal, it is not harmful, and that I'm just lying and using feminist think tanks. They made a bunch of deceitful claims. They lied about a lot of stuff. They even have to concede on some points, surprisingly, but they made numerous errors in order to argue that child marriage should be allowed and should not be considered harmful. From the audience perspective, that's pretty bad, because here you have two guys claiming there is no research that really demonstrates massive harm of child marriage. Therefore, it's perfectly normal for grown men to go out and marry and abuse children. I'm not going to stand for that. And I went through their whole review of my opening statement and rebuttal period, and that's what I'm going to be responding to, and noted they made numerous errors. To give you some highlights of what we're going to cover today, Daniel puts up a graph claiming this study shows that men are naturally just attracted to 14-year-olds. That is false. The graph he shows isn't even in the study. I doubt he even looked at it. I think he just found it online. They bring up a study claiming that it was just the average age that girls in the Roman Empire were marrying was between like 13 and 15. That is also false. The study does not say that. They hint and they speak about this study that was apparently done in Washington State that apparently shows there is no harm caused by teen pregnancy. But they don't show you the study. I'm going to show you the study. I'm going to read from it. They didn't read from it. They're deliberately hiding what that paper actually says. They make a lot of other errors beyond that. So we're going to go through this all. It may take a couple hours. I don't really care. Public service announcements on Twitter. There is Dr. Javed Hashmi has been trying to get Daniel Haqiqatjou to finalize a debate with them in June. He hasn't gotten back to him. I want to announce that so people can be known aware that this is happening. And Dr. Hashmi has been trying to get this set up. Also, with regards to that, I want to make it also known that there was a lot of Muslims that have come to my side on this issue. I appreciate that. When I attack Islam today, it's not attacking moderate, progressive forms of Islam. We're only going after the radical versions, like what Daniel holds to, the extreme conservative views that hold to child marriage. So yeah, we're going to go through this opening statement. Now, again, this is Daniel and Dr. Abdullah. I'm just going to call him Abdullah. Going through my opening statement. Let me pull it up here so you guys can see. I'm not starting at the beginning. I'm going to, at some points, I've written time markers down here where I might jump ahead a few minutes just to save on time. But I will go through their opening statement. I'm going to just put this on. Let's go 1.25 should be fine. And I'm just going to start going through it, and I'm going to start to show you the problems. You'll see very early on. Thank you. Thank you for the super chat, Joel. Appreciate that. Well, here's what I wanted to say this. We don't know. The thing is, again, he's hiding his face. We don't know his credentials, but he just claims to be a physician in New York. But you will see numerous issues that are going to make your put up some red flags about things he says. Towards the end, I'm going to cover this, but he might be an anti-vaxxer. He starts to throw shade on the CDC, and Daniel's going to jump in really fast and go, no, we can't say that. He makes some claims that I will show are just directly contradictory to the medical literature on it. He claims I've misrepresented research, and I'm going to show you I didn't. We're going to go through a lot of this stuff. But let's dive in. Let me know if you guys have any technical issues. I'll keep an eye on the chat. And yeah, let's just get through this thing.
That's the point.
Okay.
So to begin with, he uses these two pictures to show us how creepy and terrible child marriage is. I actually looked these up. The left picture is from a YouTube channel that they did for a prank. They dressed this guy up as this old, ugly, creepy-looking man, and they put a minor next to him, and they put them in Times Square in 2016. just to, get people riled up and angry. And they posted it on their YouTube channel as a social experiment. The picture on the left is not a real picture. That is a setup. The picture on the right is a photo shoot from UNICEF to argue against child marriage. The picture on the left is also a setup by...
Does Abdullah not realize how stock footage sites work? Does he realize that if he sees a billboard with a doctor on it, it's probably not a real doctor, but a paid actor? They're taking issue with the fact that I used stock photos. And this somehow shows I'm being deceitful. What? Do you guys not realize how stock photos work? Most of the photos you see in advertisements are probably not real. But this is the kind of stuff they use. And I wanted to show you a sneak peek of the type of the way they sort of handle this kind of thing. But I want to move ahead here a little bit to when they start responding to things I've actually said here. But yeah, they're upset that I use stock photo sites. Come on, that's ridiculous. So again, they're reviewing my opening statement, and they're going to make a bunch of blunders as we start getting into the age of puberty here. So let's get into this.
Right now, I have more.
Yep.
So he cites these talking points. He says teenager is like someone between 15 to 17 years of age. And he says maturity is he's trying to argue that maturity is attained between 15 and 17 years of age. Now, where did he get these numbers? So the top quote, if you look closely, he took it from a positive parenting tips page. And that's from the positive parenting tips page of the CDC. And it's, has advice. It has vague general advice for families of teenagers saying, hey, your child will be rebellious and sexually experiment. Nowhere does it say age of maturity is 15 or 17. This is just a public facing, PCA kind of public service announcement kind of website. This is not a scientific publication by the CDC. Nowhere does the CDC define a teenager as 15 to 17.
Right.
And he's not really citing a real source for the top quote. The bottom quote.
Okay. I cited the CDC. The CDC is a reputable source, guys. He's claiming that it's not a published study by the CDC. Let me just go to the actual source, and I will show you where I got it. This is from the CDC's website. Okay. Yeah, it's not a published study, but the information on the CDC's website still comes from medical experts. I mean, is this guy going to go to his doctor and the doctor is going to be like, hey, you need to lose a little weight? Is the guy going to be like, well, you need to show me a study? No, you can take the advice from medical experts. And the advice we get from the CDC is coming from medical experts here. And it says that teenagers, basically, most girls will be physically mature by now and most will have completed puberty. And I'll cite some more coming up to show that, that, again, this is not just them. I'll show you other research as well that shows this. But let's get back to Abdullah trying to respond and argue that this is inaccurate to say that puberty is completed in most girls between 15 and 17.
Is from the Encyclopedia of Educational Therapy and Philosophy. And this is, again, not a medical journal. This is the guy who wrote the bottom quote has a education degree.
Right.
That bottom quote is not making any scientific point.
Okay, so then what is the science?
Well, the science is, as you said, as you accurately quoted multiple times, the biological definition of maturity is puberty, and the puberty process takes a child to maturity, to adulthood. And in girls, it can be completed between 10 to 13 to sometimes 15 years of age. It differs, but in most cases, it is complete by 12, 13.
Puberty is complete by 12 or 13, according to Abdullah here, who is said to be a physician in New York. Yes, you heard that correct. Okay, so this is coming from someone claiming to be a doctor, therefore it needs to be addressed. So let's address it here. I'm going to share my screen here. Let me pull up my notes. First, let's talk about the source I use, okay? So I'm going to I will just share my entire screen. That way it is easier. because I'm going to, oh no. All right, so this is the guy I quoted. Okay, he's a professor at Johns Hopkins. He's got a degree in psychological training. So he's an educational psychologist, okay? The source that I quoted, let me pull up my notes here, okay? Go to page 18 here when it loads. Okay. Seemed like nothing pretty controversial. Yeah, most girls basically complete puberty by the time they get to 15 or 17, as you can see down here at the bottom. Okay, didn't really seem like it'd be a controversial thing since this is what the CDC says. But Abdullah wants to dispute this. Okay, well, let's pull up some more medical research on this. What page did I have there? So page 111 here. So page 111 of metabolic syndrome and obesity in childhood and adolescence. Let's go down to page 111. You can see as well, it will say 15 to 17. So yeah, top paragraph. On average, girls begin puberty at 9 to 11, and boys begin puberty at 10 to 12. Girls usually complete puberty by ages 15 to 17. Sorry, I hit the wrong thing there. I'm going to come to this stuff later. So there's a source right there, 15 to 17. Let's pull up the next one, okay? Adolescent, biological, and psychological perspectives. What page did I say there? Page 11. So pretty early on in here. Okay. Once again, okay, talking about puberty males, but it says the growth of the sexual organs and secondary sexual traits is complete in boys around the ages of 17 to 19 and girls around 15 to 17. Okay, let's do another one. Now, this one I believe is like page 1500, like it's a huge medical textbook. Yeah, it's like 1543. Okay, so again, middle adolescence, age 15 to 7. By middle adolescence, the physical development of girls is complete, and most boys are well on their way to completing puberty. So he's saying, you heard him, he said that puberty is completed most by 12, 13, and I can easily pull up numerous additional textbooks, medical textbooks, saying no, 15 to 7, confirming what the CDC says. Moreover, a source I actually used in my opening statement was this one here. Okay, it says that on average, puberty typically begins between 18 and 13 in females. Begins. Why would it be ending around this time if what the medical experts say, that's when it begins? Very confusing when he said this. And so, like, where is he getting this information from? I can easily pull up medical textbooks and papers showing that puberty begins between 8 and 13 and ends in girls between 15 and 17. So this is why in the West, we assign adulthood to 18 because we know in most boys and girls, most people have completed puberty by this point and they've mentally matured to a place where they're pretty well set. So yeah, not really sure what this guy is trying to get on about. Yeah, I know. Interesting. When he said that, I couldn't believe it. But yeah, that's what he said there. So let's play a little bit more, and then I wanted to move ahead to where they start talking about pelvic floors at 41 minutes in. But let's see if he's got anything else to say here before we go on.
And
it's complete by 12 or 13.
Complete by 12 or 13, like you said many times.
Complete by 12 or 13. You heard it there. Okay. Again, we don't know how much about this guy is. Just claims to be a physician in New York, but he's contradicting the medical literature. Okay. The CDC. Okay. Medical textbooks. I don't know what to tell you.
And he is just quoting the Encyclopedia of Educational Theory about how to educate youngsters. He's not quoting any medical source. Why is he doing this? Because he knows that actual medical sources go against what he's trying to argue.
Yeah, the medical sources that I just showed you go against this claim. This is the type of deceit we're going to see throughout this, and it's going to get much worse. You wait till we get to the Washington State study that Abdullah cites. I got it, and we're going to spend a little time going through that.
So he does this a lot. We will notice that he does this a lot.
Yeah. So when people think about a 12-year-old or an 11-year-old, they have a hard time seeing that a 12-year-old can be a grown woman. Like, because when you say that, oh, they're puberty, like they're physically mature, they think of like size, and a 12-year-old or 11-year-old, they're not that big in size. So how can they be physically mature? Like, okay, fine, they've hit puberty, but why should that count as physical maturity? It seems completely unintuitive.
Well,
how would you respond to that?
Yeah, so different girls and different boys mature at different times. Some of them start maturing at 7, 6, 7, 8. Some of them are, some of them start growing late. Some of them have that growth spurt, start very late at 11, 12. And boys will remember, they were short until they were 11, 12, 13. And but at that same age group, girls have almost completed their puberty. This is about 5th or 6th grade in public school years. And if you guys can remember, on the 5th or 6th grade, the girls were towering over the boys.
Okay, again, he's not citing any literature to support this. I showed you numerous sources. He's contradicting what the CDC shows. Why should we go with this unnamed doctor, just going by his first name, Abdullah? We don't know much about him. We don't even know his credentials. And I can show you what the medical literature shows. Again, girls complete puberty 15 to 17. They're starting in the age range he says they're beginning. So he doesn't really cite much here. Let's see what else he has to say, though.
The girls would be much taller than the boys of the same class, of the same age group, because as is accurately mentioned on the screen here, girls are always ahead in terms of development, even starting from birth, even from infanthood. Girls are always ahead in development. Their bone age, their bone development is much more advanced. This is the CDC stats, I believe.
This is national health statistics.
And this one right here, and this one right here says 1% of girls have their period at 8 years. 4% have their period by 9 years of age. Now, this
10% by 10.
10% of girls have their periods by 10 years of age. So period is not just, one morning a little girl wakes up, a little toddler wakes up one morning and discovers a pool of blood out of nowhere.
Okay, yeah, but getting your first period is not the end of puberty. I can find no medical literature that says that. Okay, so this is irrelevant. This is all he really brings up. He does talk about the Tanner stages. Let's move up to that, though, to save a little bit of time here, because they're just going to go on about this stuff. Again, we agree girls get their puberty before 15 and 17 on average. But again, that doesn't mean that's the end of puberty.
Percent of their adult pelvic dimensions. So their pelvic growth has completed by 85%.
Hold on, I'm going to go back a little bit here.
So once you have your period, that's your adult height. You have reached your physical maturity at menarche, basically. And he also makes a big deal about pelvic.
You've reached your physical maturity at menarche. Let's keep listening, though.
Dimensions, small pelvis. So at the time of menarche, girls have 85% of their adult pelvic dimensions. So their pelvic growth has completed by 85%.
Okay. What? You just said they're basically complete by puberty by 12 or 13, but you're saying the pelvic dimensions are not fully complete at this stage. So they haven't completed puberty then, right? They still have 15% of pelvic dimension growth to go. So which is it? Are you completing puberty by 12 or 13, or do you still have more pelvic dimension to grow? And again, that extra 15% can be a lot given the size of a typical infant's cranium. Okay, babies' heads are big. Women need all the space they can get, guys. So again, who is this guy? What are his credentials? And why is he saying things that directly contradict what the CDC says, what medical textbooks say? Okay, I'm not saying he's not a physician. I'm just saying we don't know, and we don't know his credentials.
And the remaining 15% is complete within the next 1 or 2 years.
Right.
So going back to the initial argument that I was making, at menarche, girls are basically adults. They are adult size. After menarche, there's no better biological marker of adulthood. So it's a very good marker. It's not the only marker, but it is a very good marker of adulthood.
He wants to say that the moment they reach the age of menarche, they're basically adults, even though their pelvic floors have not fully developed. Even though the medical literature, again, says that puberty is not complete until about 15 to 17. And we're not even talking about brain development. Abdullah never covers brain development, mental development. They don't even touch the studies I cited in my opening statement that showed all the psychological damage from child marriage. They conveniently skip over that and claim they've refuted me, but we'll get there.
Adulthood. In fact, scientific studies talk about gynecologic age. They say, patient at the age of patient at the second gynecologic year is similar to patients in their 30s for birth complications. What they mean by gynecologic years is after menarche, after the first period. And you have the Tanner stages on the page right here. This is what medical doctors use to evaluate maturity in a.
Okay. Notice the Tanner stage. Menarche is in stage 4, as you can see. That's not the end of puberty, obviously, because you still have Tanner stage 5. So even by their own graph, no, puberty is not complete when you get to the age of menarche. You still have more growth and development to go through. This is, again, why the textbooks I cite say 15 to 17.
A girl and a boy. This is the girl's version. So as you can see, like 5 Tanner stages. And
menarche happens at stage 4. So I think this is what people, what you're saying. Like, people have this idea that you have a toddler and then suddenly there's a pool of blood. Suddenly the period happens. No, there's a lot of physical growth internally and externally. And so internally, when menarche happens, the child or the minor has been completely matured physically and is ready for reproduction. But, internally, in terms of the internal organs, the reproductive organs, those have developed in much earlier stages.
But again, pelvic floor is not fully developed, according to your own friend here, Abdullah. So yeah, they're not fully developed yet.
Yes. The internal organs actually start growing before anything else becomes visible from the outside. And once you have external, body shape changes, like that the girl you had to censor on the initial slide, once things are at that stage, that is functionally an adult, basically. And
okay, they just keep sort of saying this over and over again, even though they're contradicting all the medical literature, contradicting their own graph. You're not functionally an adult because, again, your brain is not fully developed to the state where medical experts, psychiatrists have said that you could basically be given the status of adulthood. I'm going to move ahead a little bit to just cut out some of the fluff because they just sort of keep saying the same point over again. I'm just going to go a few minutes up just to about 46 minutes in because they're going to start talking about some things and then we're going to start getting into the studies I cited. Demonstrated scientifically. So the first thing to note is puberty is not a boundary point that girls cross over. It's a process. It takes time for a girl's hips to widen, for her to develop into a woman. This is nowhere near complete when a girl has her first period. To treat womanhood as a boundary point for girls and not as a process is an unscientific way to understand puberty. There is no reason to assume a girl becomes a woman the moment she shows any sign of puberty, let alone she be ready for marriage and childbearing. Yet this is the Islamic teaching on the issue, which Daniel stated.
This is a misrepresentation.
This study, that is...
He is he's misrepresenting Islam. He says, there's no one sign that you can take for puberty. While he says there's no one sign that you can use for maturity. Meanwhile, he's using the calendar age as the only sign of possible maturity. Whereas in Islam and every other pre-modern culture, people looked at the physical development. People looked at whether the girl had shown signs of fertility, which menstruation is a good sign of fertility. People looked at, of course, ability to be helpful, ability to be...
Okay. Abdullah here seems a little confused because I was responding to Daniel in this section. Do you guys remember? That's what I was responding to here. Daniel said you can consummate marriage when there are any signs of physical maturity. Now, remember, in Islam, you can consummate the marriage when at puberty. Okay, what is so fundamentally wrong about consummating marriage at puberty? Okay, and again, in our very debate at 49:29, where I'm debating Daniel, he says because if you can start fertilizing a female as soon as she's showing signs of imminent fertility, the period of menarche, then you will maximize because you've secured the female right at the beginning, the start of when she will potentially, you can use her. When the body is physically mature is what he says. So here, Abdullah is ironically throwing Daniel under the bus because in my opening statement, I was responding to what Daniel said, that you can consummate the marriage at puberty as soon as you show any signs of physical maturity. Abdullah is saying that's wrong. So ironically, he's saying I'm misrepresenting the Islamic teaching when really I was representing Daniel's position, which shows that Daniel was representing the Islamic teaching. So Abdullah, ironically, is throwing his co-host here under the bus. But let's get back to what they have to share here. I just wanted to point that out. I think we are going to, let me see here. Let's pull this back up. We're going to, let's just play a little bit more and see what they say.
Helpful in daily tasks, the household tasks, which was a massive burden in the pre-modern.
Again, he's just pointing out that Daniel did not understand the Islamic teaching, if Abdullah is correct. I was responding to what Daniel said about the Islamic teaching. But let's move ahead to when they start covering the studies that I cite. So they're going to take issue with the first two papers I cited and then ignore the rest. They're going to cherry pick. They're going to take the fact that I was making a cumulative case and ignore that I had much more robust studies beyond my initial assessment. But here, let's get into some of these. Problems in newborn babies, faulty feeding practices, lack of knowledge regarding family welfare methods, and health implications. They note child marriages lead to serious health consequences. It also bereaves young girls of their childhood by overburdening them with domestic responsibility.
Yeah, the study actually does not prove that anywhere. The study he's citing does not prove this claim anywhere.
Okay, we're going to stop there. Studies like this cannot prove. They can only make inductive inferences, which, I thought would have been obvious. Let me pull up a source here. So I will share my screen again. Sociology. Okay. I'm going to go down to the section on inductive approach. Okay. Some sociologists conduct scientific research through a positive framework utilizing a hypothetical deductive formulation of research questions. Other sociologists conduct scientific research by employing an interpretive framework that is often inductive in nature. A lot of sociological research, well, most, has to be inductive. Of course, it's not going to prove my case. Daniel should know this. He cites studies all the time he uses as evidence to support his case. This is what he said in his debate with Tom Jump. He can't prove something. He's arguing for evidence. The harm is evidence of something. But here, they want to shift the goalpost. That my one study out of the cumulative case I was making does not prove. Well, of course it doesn't prove, but it is evidence that child marriage is harmful, which was my point. And it's only one study among multiple, which they're not even going to cover for the most part.
So if we can take some time to pick apart the study that he's citing here.
Sure, I can pull it up. You want me to pull it up actually and then show it on the screen?
Yeah, we could just pull it up on the screen so our viewers can also appreciate the groundbreaking science on this article.
Okay, I believe this is it.
An epidemiological study of child marriages in a rural community of Gujarat.
And I cited the one in the rural community to start as just sort of like laying the groundwork. Multiple other studies confirm their same results, which they're going to ignore.
Yeah.
So this paper is from the Indian Journal of Community Medicine, written by a family physician and her survey assistant, I believe. And this paper is basically a survey. They went to a single village in India, completely Hindu village. There was like maybe one Muslim couple.
Okay, to be clear, surveys are typically how sociological studies are done. If you go back to that source I just had on the screen on sociology, they note surveys are a pretty common way to conduct sociological research. This is not out of the ordinary to conduct surveys like this.
Yep.
They went to a Hindu village in India, a single village in India, where they showed that lower caste people marry very young and higher caste people marry later in life. And
right.
They had about 158 people participating in their survey. And they basically go door to door, knock on.
No, they had 100 they looked at 755 couples, and then they honed in on about 158 couples. So not 150 people, 158 couples.
The door and ask them a bunch of questions like, how long ago were you married? How many children do you have? Do you remember if you had any difficulties during labor? Did you have asphyxiation during labor? Did the baby suffer after birth? Did you have seizures? Did the baby have seizures? Then they ask, do you know what's the correct diet for a kid until he's 6 months old. Do you know what's the correct diet for a kid after 6 months? When did you first start solid foods, and so on and so on? So this is a community medicine survey, basically. And they ran some very basic statistics on the survey data that they collected. And when I say
yep, that's true,
very basic, I mean very basic. They did not control for any of the confounding factors. Like I mentioned, the richer the family was, the higher caste, the Brahmin caste or whatever caste, the higher caste family was, they married later in life. They were probably richer, they were better educated, most likely. They probably had better health, better access to many hospitals because of the caste system in India. So we can assume that there were very significant socioeconomic differences. Yet in the analysis, the paper does not take any of this into account. They just use raw numbers. They say, oh, they make some groundbreaking points, such as girls who married under the age of 18 had children earlier than the other group. Wow, that is groundbreaking facts.
Brilliant.
And truly brilliant facts. And many of the things. And
go ahead.
Yeah.
All right. Well, real quick. Again, this was me laying the groundwork. This study is not useless. It would be useless if later research contradicted it. But as I go through my opening statement, I show that no, their basic initial assessment is multiplied. It's compounded by more and more research, more robust research. And this was the point. I cited narrative reviews that cover multiple studies to just show that, yeah, this initial assessment just keeps getting bigger and bigger. When these two guys get to the narrative reviews in my opening statement, they just skip right over them. They don't even look at them. They spend a lot of time on this one study. They hone in on this, but they don't look at the more robust studies I use that use linear regression models as well, which we'll get to.
Yeah. And many of the things go ahead, please.
Oh, well, I was going to say that the not taking into account socioeconomic factors like not accounting for poverty, this means that their analysis is useless. Like, it doesn't show that child marriage is causing these problems. Like, early marriage is the causal factor. Like, that's what Mike Jones is claiming.
No,
He's saying that look, this early marriage causes these health problems, but you.
Okay, it does. As the research I showed basically points to that when you start compounding the research. Also, and let's just pull up the study here quickly so we can talk a little bit about this. Let me find it here because I got it saved right in health consequences. Here it is. All right. Bear with me, ladies and gentlemen, while I pull up things that I need to get to. Okay. So some of the stuff, they will admit, Abdullah's going to admit later, things like low birth weight, preterm delivery. They're going to concede this point later on and say that, yes, this is associated with child marriage. So for them to say this is useless is just contradicting what they state later in the thing. Some of these things cannot be accounted for by poverty, like healthborns and newborn babies. They also mentioned that, some of the higher classes would be higher educated. Well, then why are more educated people, if the causal relation is not related, why are more educated people rejecting child marriage, if that's the argument they're making? If educated people in India are rejecting child marriage and uneducated people are engaging in it, what does that say about child marriage? It says that more educated people would understand this is harmful and they move away from it. So this doesn't really help them. And again, they're trying to claim this study is useless. That is false. It's a good initial study to show harm. But if you find later research that compounds it, then yes, this study is accurate. And that was my point. But they're taking things out of context. So let's get back to these two guys, because it's only going to get worse. It's going to get much worse for them, as you'll see, especially when we get to the second paper. And Abdullah starts to make some research errors there.
You can't really make that claim based on this paper because this paper doesn't distinguish whether these health problems are caused by a lack of access to healthcare, a lack of information about pregnancy and childbirth, or just anything that can come from poverty. This survey of 158 families, and then the regression, they don't do any regression, they just report
they do not
the survey results. So this is like the lowest level of data that you can cite, and it doesn't actually prove the point. It doesn't even indicate the point that Mike Jones is trying to claim. I don't think.
Okay, so they're claiming this doesn't have a regression model. That's accurate, but again, I cited so many other studies that do, and they're not going to mention those. So Let's give a recap of some of the studies I cited that have regression models. Associations between girl-child marriage and intimate partner violence in sub-Saharan Africa, insights from a multi-country analysis of demographics and health surveys. That has a regression model, accounts for poverty. Associations of child marriage with suicidal thoughts and attempts among adolescents, girls in Ethiopia, regression models there. Child marriage and its associations with morbidity and mortality of under 5-year-old children in Bangladesh. That one has a regression model. Early marriage, stressful life events, and risk of suicide and suicide attempts, a case study control in Iran. That one does as well. Child marriage and the mental health of adolescent girls, a longitudinal cohort study from Uttar Pradesh and Bihar in India. That one also uses regression models. Again, what I'm doing in this is I'm building a cumulative case. Here is one study that when you start to look at the survey data, it shows harm. Do other studies confirm this? Yes. But they don't want to do that. They're going to focus in on one and take things out of context. Again, nothing in the study is incorrect. They're just shifting the goalpost here. Notice what they're doing here. They're just shifting the goalpost.
I don't think Mike Jones has any kind of scientific education. So I don't think he knows what a regression even is or what confounding variables in science are. Like, I don't think he understands those things. I think he just Googled child marriage problem science. He Googled that and he just took the first article or the first paper.
I want you guys to remember that when we start getting to some of the studies Daniel cites later, like on apparently men being attracted to 14-year-olds. You know, I just Googled the studies and didn't know what I was talking about. Wait till you see what he does when we get to his paper by Scheidel or his alleged study from 1995 on attraction. Really the pot calling the kettle black, if he's right.
Yeah, and even inside the low quality paper that he found, even inside this paper, he doesn't actually quote the results all that much. He basically pulls the sentences that he likes. Right. So he takes out.
This is directly false. I quoted directly from the results in the abstract in the thing. So they're just absolutely wrong. The very first thing I said was the results of the study pulling from the abstract. Abdullah is just either forgotten that fact or he is lying.
Takes out a sentence from the introduction part. Actually, 2 sentences from the introduction part. He pulls a lot of sentences or quotes from the discussion part. Which are actually based on other papers. So he's not even citing this paper correctly. He is
okay. Notice what Abdullah just said. At some points I pulled quotes that they were using from other papers. Do you realize that just makes my case stronger because I'm showing multiple studies confirming the same results of this study? I cited the results in my opening statement, and then I pointed out other quotes in the paper that just compound this effect, showing that, other studies have found this results as well. So Abdullah is shooting himself in the foot here.
Is, showing the paper to us, and talking about findings that are not inside this paper.
Right.
He's quoting other papers that are mentioned inside this paper as if they were proven by this Indian study.
Right. All right, let's move on because there's so many papers. Like if we elaborate every single blunder that this guy.
All right, let's no, I want to keep going here.
Is making we're gonna have an 8-hour long
stream. It will be probably. I mean, but just to show, this is the first paper that he starts quoting. This is the basis of his main argument. So
yes, the basis of my main argument. Did I stop there, Abdullah? No, I built on it. And you ignore most of the research I cited, and we both know that's true.
This gives you an idea of how strong his arguments are.
Yeah. I mean, I had many medical doctors that message me, actually email me saying like, this guy is an idiot. This is the kind of stuff he's citing. So
you heard it here, folks. Unnamed doctors said Daniel's right, even though they constantly, him and his co-host here are contradicting the medical literature on when puberty ends.
I mean, this is, and there are some medical doctors in the stream right now in the chat who are saying like, this guy doesn't know the ABCs of basic scientific articles and scientific research. But
how do you know that? Like, someone shows up in your chat, says I'm a doctor, and you just believe them because they confirm what you want. This is what we're dealing with, folks. All right, let's move it. Let's cut out some of the fluff here. Mistakes that hinder their own children's mental and social development, because the girls have had their own mental and social development hindered by being forced to marry so young. So they then hinder the development of their own children. So arguing for girls to be forced into.
This is not a finding from the study. This is not even a research study. You know what he's citing? He is citing a report from a feminist think tank from Washington, D.C. He's citing a feminist think tank called International Center for Research on Women in Washington, D.C. And he's citing their report. This is none of these. I went to that paper as well. None of these are actually scientific findings. They are just claims that the other report makes.
Okay, that's not accurate. Let's pull it up. So yes, I'm citing a report. So let's just, I will share my full screen again. So yes, I'm citing a report here. I can show you it directly. So here is the report, Too Young to Wed. Who are these three researchers? Well, we can see who they are. Okay. Okay, Senior Associate in Dreams and Balloon of Science Project Director. Okay, this is somebody who has studied HIV infection in Sub-Saharan Africa. Okay, they have relevant credentials, as you can see. Let's go to the next person. Okay. Professor of Practice, okay, PhD, works with health education opportunities in the global south. Again, relevant credentials, works in the health systems. This last one I'm not sure because it's a very common name, but I think this is the researcher base that I could find. Again, Senior Technical Expert of Reproductive Health in Washington, D.C. So 3 relevant experts, guys. This is not, this paper, this report here is not something that is useless. And again, do they cite research? Yes. They cite a ton of research to confirm the findings of their report. This is not something that is useless. You can see this is coming from experts that are studying women's health, and they're citing lots of various studies. You can see a lot of the claims they show. Okay, as a result, even girls, they are still children, are often defined solely wives and mothers and exposed to responsibilities and risks for which they're not often physically or mentally prepared. This is what the findings of their research shows from a multinational analysis. You can see infant mortality rates by age of mother based on their research. Okay, they're trying to claim this is just some sort of like opinion piece that was put out by feminists or non-experts. That's not the case. You can see quite clearly what this study is basically showing. So yeah, I want to get to something else though, because we're about to see a very interesting blunder from Abdullah. So let's get right back into there. Real quick. Where was that? Yeah, the feminists aren't, exactly. That's a great point as well. It would be a genetic fallacy. Just because they're feminists, that does not mean they're wrong.
So this quote right here, the immaturity and lack of education undermines her capacity. Like that's what you're referring to. That's from a feminist think tank.
The last one that he was talking about, the physiologically, when a girl is married at a very young age, she's more likely to get pregnant and deliver a baby at an age when she's physiologically and psychologically not prepared for childbirth. This is not from a research study. This is from a feminist think tank. It is not backed by data in that paper from the think tank.
It most certainly is backed by a ton of data, which I just showed for you. This is the type of deception they go. Notice they don't put the study on the screen. They don't put the report on the screen. They don't show you the research they're using. You guys can go read it yourselves.
Right.
I actually went back and checked the source of his source, unlike he himself failed to do so.
Yeah, so he's quoting things from these secondary sources, and he's not checking the source of this. Like, he's not
ironic
checking that primary source. But when you check the primary source, it's just like think tanks, it's like UNICEF, like just making broad claims based on feminist or liberal ideology. It's not like zero data. It's not like a medical study. So this is his dishonesty or incompetence. Maybe he's just incompetent. He can't distinguish between a secondary source and a primary source. That could be the problem.
You're going to see them make those claims a lot. And quite honestly, there's a lot of projection in what they're saying when they do this. They're really trying to compensate for the lack of research they've done and the blunders they're about to make.
Could be.
These situations is blatantly immoral. In 2007, the United Nations Children Fund reported that a girl under 15 is 5 times more likely to die during pregnancy and childbirth than a woman in her 20s. Another paper pointed out
that data that comes up a lot in this discussion. That comes up a lot. He will keep bringing that up. 5 times more likely. So he did not take that claim from the original source either. He quotes this Indian paper, this paper written by 2 Desi aunties, and he took that quote from this paper. When you go back to
no offense to Desi aunties, by the way.
No, we love Desi aunties. We absolutely love Desi aunties. But when you go back to that 2007 paper, it quotes from a 2001 UN paper, and not even a paper, report. 2007 report quotes from a 2001 report. When you go to that one, it goes back to a 1997 report. When you go to that one, there's no source. This is basically a UN line. This is a UN slogan that girls under 19, girls under 15 are 5 times more likely to die, and compared to girls in her 20s. So this is a UN catchphrase that they like to use. But when you actually go back to the 1997 paper, it is different on that paper. On that paper, it claims girls under 15 are 5 times more likely to die in childbirth than girls between 15 to 19. And those girls 15 to 19 are in turn twice as likely to die as girls in their 20s. So the actual number that the UN initially claimed was 10 times more likely in 1997.
Mm-hmm.
But
all right, let's stop there because I think this is where Abdullah got a little confused. He didn't track the source down properly, and I'll show you. So I'm just going to go through the sources here. So again, the claim is a girl under 15 is 5 times more likely to die during pregnancy and childbirth than a woman in her 20s. That's the claim. Now that's coming from, as I pointed out in the debate, that's coming from a 2007 report. So I'm going to share my screen because I'm going to go through a bunch of studies here to show you where this is coming from. Abdullah is just wrong here. So I'm just going to have to go full screen again because I'm going to go through a lot. All right. So again, that's the claim they're making. Let's pull through. So let's go to the 2007 report. Okay, here it is. Okay, go down to page 4. We'll see the claim. Okay, girls under 15 are 5 times more likely to die during pregnancy and childbirth than a woman in her 20s. Okay, there's the claim, as you guys can see. Okay, is that on the screen properly? Sorry, I hit the wrong thing there. So, all right, yeah, so there's the claim. Now, this is in a section called Gender Discrimination Across Life Cycle. The sources are at the end, so we got to go to page 88 down here. So again, here it is. Gender discrimination across life cycles. Information derived from these 3 papers here. Okay. So notice none of them are a 2001 report as Abdullah claimed. That's just not the case. Okay. Where I'm pretty sure. So I went through all of these and I found the claim in one of them. I believe it was this 2003 report here. So I got that. So 2003 report here. Here we go to here. Early childhood has been linked to higher rates of maternal and child morbidity and mortality, truncated educated opportunities, lower future family income, reported by these guys here. Okay. Reviewed in evidence for the effects of childbearing. Okay. Notice that's a 1998 paper, not a 1997 paper. We can go to that one. Zabin, 1998. Okay. What does this study show? Okay. A lot of stuff. Because the risks are greater for younger than older adolescents, World Health Organization data in age groups 5 to 14, 15 to 20, even data for groups ages 15 to 9 are limited, usually teen outcomes. So I highlighted a bunch of stuff in this because I went through it all. Okay. Several studies have examined HPV among young women in Africa, reviewing more than 21,000. Harrison et al., 1985. Younger mothers were 15 more likely to experience premature labor than were older mothers. Here's where we start getting to the claim. I believe this is it here. Yes. So notice Abdullah got the whole train of thought wrong. He probably got confused with the report, went to the wrong place. This is where the actual claim is. Harrison et al. Reported that prenatal death rates among infants of teenagers aged 15 or younger at 180 deaths per 1,000 deliveries, compared with rates of 100 deaths older for women. Okay. Higher rates there. Where is the one I'm looking up for? Did I get? So as you can see here, they basically point out that there's higher rates of death for girls that are under 15. Okay? These studies show that children born to women younger than 15 were more than 2 times more likely to die at a low birth weight than women aged 20. So what is that actual study? Well, we can see it here. Just pull it up for you guys. Okay. Childbearing Health and Social Priorities, a survey of 22,734 consecutive hospital births in Zaria, North Nigeria. So again, you can see where these claims are going back to. Are they precise? Not precise. Maybe you can make that claim, but they're still arguing that, yes, there's a higher rate. You're far more likely to die in childbirth if you're under 15 than if you were having children in your 20s. So yeah, this is not accurate at all. What he's saying, that this goes back to some 1997 report. You can clearly see for yourselves where all these reports are coming from. And so I'm not really sure if Abdullah got a little confused in trying to track the stuff down. But I mean, you know, this happens sometimes. That could have been what seems to have been the case here. But you can see where they're getting their numbers from. So let's get back to what we're going through here. You guys can check this out if you want. This study I can't find online. I did order it through the University of Arizona Library. Hopefully I'll get it sometime soon, but unfortunately, that's the best I can do right now. But again, they do cite research going back. This doesn't just go back to UN talking points, as Abdullah was claiming. So I'm going to go back and go right back into this, share screen. Good.
When they kept quoting it later on, they kind of misquoted it themselves. UN misquoted its own slogan and turned it into 5 times instead of 10 times. Now, I looked into all the papers, and other doctors, other researchers that messaged us also went back and checked the statistic. It doesn't actually point to any kind of data in the UN reports. It just comes from the UN Commission of Child Reproductive or Child Health, Child Marriage, Anti-Child Marriage Department.
Right.
It doesn't actually quote any sources. And so this is one of the main claims that he rests his entire argument on. So we would have to.
Here's one chart that I remember you shared with me. Maybe you can explain this chart.
Sure. Yeah. So this one.
Okay, here we go, guys. We're about to reach direct deception. Get ready. This is big. Get ready for this.
Maternal morbidity. I don't know if people can see that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to let it play out for a good 4 minutes, and then I'm going to respond, and we're going to go through where they got this study, where they got these charts from. They're not going to show you the study, but I will.
So yeah, when the UN claims, children under 15 are, children under 19 are 5 times more likely to die in childbirth, they are, if we are being charitable to the UN, they are probably using countrywide mortality data, maternal childbirth mortality data by age group. This is raw numbers. This is just comparing raw numbers. It is not statistics. It is not controlling for any variables. And almost always that 5 times figure is from African countries. They cite Mali. They cite countries like that. But this study that Daniel has on the screen right now, this is from the U.S. state of Washington, one of the whitest, most privileged, like a high quality healthcare access state in the United States. So this study is about all the childbirths that took place between 2003 and 2013.
Okay, real quick. Notice what is on the screen: 15 to 19, 20 to 24. What was the original claim in the reports? To go back to the studies I cited: girls under 15, girls under 16. Notice now the shift. This is a bait and switch. Notice now we're only talking about girls over 15. That's important because, again, it's irrelevant, but this is what he's doing.
13. This is every single childbirth in Washington state for a 10-year period, actually 11-year period. So this is a massive, massive study. The number here, the number of data points here, the number of study participants here is 828,000, not 150 like the one he cites. This is a study done on 820,000 childbirths. And on here you can see the relationship between age and adverse events during childbirth. And at the left end of the graph, you have the age group 15 to 19, and it is low. It is very low, and it gets a little lower on the next age group, 20 to 24. The curve goes down a little bit lower and lower, and then after 35 to 39 years of age, it starts rising rapidly, and by 45, 50 years of age, it is like obviously much more dangerous for any female giving birth after the age of 40. Now, this right here is the raw data from the Washington study. This is not adjusted for any factors such as poverty, such as race, education status, smoking, alcohol intake. So this is not adjusted for any of these. A lot of things could be confounding this data. So this is not the pure data. The pure data is the other graph, the orange one. I think you just cropped it out.
Yeah. Let me bring that up.
Mm-hmm.
I just have to make it larger so people can see. Okay.
So this right here is the adjusted data, where, let me read from the paper, where they adjust for a large variety of confounding factors such as race, marital status, body mass index, obesity, drug use, smoking, the number of times that they have given birth. It adjusts for that. It makes it all equal. Maternal education, health insurance status, and the gender of the child. So this is the adjusted data that basically purifies the effect of age on maternal health. What do you see, Daniel?
Looks negligible, like the difference, you know,
It is
under 35, it's like a negligible difference in morbidity and adverse outcomes.
Yeah, so that's exactly what the authors report. The authors reported that childbirth between ages 15 and 19 is perfectly fine, and it is basically equal to giving birth in early 30s or late 20s.
Okay, you heard what Abdullah said. He claims the study authors that made this graph say it's perfectly normal. It's perfectly fine for a girl 15 to 19 to have a child. Notice they don't put the study on the screen. They don't even say the title. Funny. Why wouldn't you say the title of this study if you want this study out? It took me a little while to find this because I had to search for keywords and things they say about it, but I found it. It doesn't say that. But first of all, remember, the claim was a girl under 15 is 5 times more likely to die in childbirth. This study is only looking at 15, so it's irrelevant to the point. This doesn't address my main point. But let's just pull up the study and go through it because I'm going to show you how they're being intentionally deceptive. Okay, they know what the study says. They have to know what the study says because they pulled those charts from it. I don't know. They cannot just be ignorant. They've got to be basically telling you things that are just not factually correct about this. So this is PMD. Let me get this one up here. There it is. Okay, here it is right here, ladies and gentlemen. Maternal age and severe maternal morbidity, a population-based retrospective cohort study. How do I know this is their study? Well, I will scroll down here and show you because there are the charts. They pulled these charts from the study. They didn't want to show you what the study actually says. Do they say it is perfectly normal to have children 15 to 19? There's no adverse health outcomes. No, let's just read from it directly. I'm going to go through it from the beginning. I'll go through all my highlights. Severe maternal morbidity was significantly higher among teenage mothers than among those. The elevated risk for severe morbidity among teen mothers disappeared after adjustment confounders except for maternal sepsis. Similar associations were observed for fetal and infant outcomes. Neonatal mortality was elevated in teen mothers. So they know, yes, when you adjust for the ratios, a lot of the problems that result from girls 15 to 19 decrease. Thanks to modern technology, Western medicine, the things that apparently Daniel hates, which we'll get to in a minute. But you can't eat with all the medical technology out there. You still can't get rid of all the risk factors. You still can't get rid of them all. Let's scroll down here. So we studied live birth and stillbirth of mothers 15 to 60. So again, not below 15, 15 to 60. They looked at over 800,000, like Abdullah said there, elevated risk for teen mothers. Again, after adjustments, the exception was the rate of maternal sepsis, which was highest among teen mothers in decline with maternal age. So again, there still is an elevated risk. Okay, the rate of composite outcome of maternal death and severe morbidity was 2.1% among teen mothers, 1.5% among those aged 25 to 29, and 3.6% among mothers 44 years of age and older. However, teen mothers were at elevated risk of sepsis. Here's their charts. The absolute rate of fetal and neonatal death and morbidity were elevated among teen mothers, and neonatal death remained higher after adjustments for demographics and pre-pregnancy factors, while the rate of NICU admission was significantly lower among teen mothers after adjustments. So again, this is what it says, ladies and gentlemen. They're not telling you the full facts. They're saying, yes, after elevations, a lot of the risk for teen mothers after 15 goes down. Not under 15. They didn't even look at that. But you still have elevated risk for sepsis, neonatal death, these kinds of things, as the study directly shows. So it makes sense they don't want to show you what the actual paper says because they're hiding to you what it actually says. This is deliberate deception. And again, what is the goal? to try to convince men around the world it's okay to marry and impregnate girls that are 15. That's your goal. And you're deliberately lying about what the paper says to get there. Guys, this is pure evil at this point. There is elevated risk. And again, they didn't even respond to my claim because the claim was under 15, you have these extreme high rates. But before we get back to it, important thing to note, yes, a lot of the studies I use focused on places like Sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East, Southeast Asia. Why? Because I was picking studies that focused on countries away from Western influence, away from all the technology, because Daniel had said some things in the past that made me, raise a couple eyebrows here. So I'm going to play a clip of Daniel from another thing he did on developing technology and how it threatens Islam, and then we'll discuss it. So here's the clip. Let me make this theater mode there.
And so far, I can't see any evidence that you can separate like these developments. You can't get modern technology as we see in the West without also getting modern society. They go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. They're mutually dependent on each other. And there's not a single counterexample. Something like feminism. Feminism is a product of industrialization as well, because you need, in order to generate enough, in order to have enough factory workers, and in order to have enough engineers and scientists and doctors, you can't exclude 50% of the population.
Remember what he said. You need a modernization, industrialism to get the amount of doctors we have. Use the word doctors.
You need to have women in that workforce. You need to have women to do the kinds of things that are necessary to free up the kind of innovation that will drive technology forward. So you need female education. If you have female education, women have to delay getting married. They delay getting married, so they have fewer children. They are more independent. They are more equal to their husbands. That destabilizes families. That produces this kind of independent woman phenomenon that we're suffering from today throughout not just Muslims, but throughout the world. So feminism is a product of industrialization, or is a necessary component. And this is explicitly what the Muslim leaders or the leaders of the Muslim community in the 20th century said. They said, look, we're behind the power curve. We're behind the West when it comes to our technology, our industrialization. We need to catch up. But we cannot catch up if we are just leaving our women at home. We cannot catch up if we're sending our children to the madrasa to learn Quran. We cannot catch up if half of the education, or not half, but 100% of the education, or 90% of the education is about Quran and Hadith and fiqh. This is a waste of time. We have to send our sons and our daughters to learn science, learn mathematics, learn how to use electronics, use the computer, on and on and on. So you have to change the educational system. You have to start mandating. No, you have to send your children. You have to send your daughter. All of this stuff, these social developments, they implemented them in the Muslim world. For what? For the purpose of industrialization. And they were right, in a sense. They were right that you could not achieve industrialization. You couldn't have the Muslim world have, this electric grid and, water treatment plants and you couldn't develop that within your country if you didn't create this educational system, this secular educational system. But what is the effect of that secular educational system? You secularize society. You take people away from Islam, and that's exactly what's been happening in all of these countries. And Egypt is one of them. Iran.
All right, I think it's pretty clear. Okay, so do you see the irony of them citing this study from Washington State? Do you see the issue here? Okay, They're trying to say that if we go to Washington State and we look at teen girls between the ages of 15 and 19, due to all the great technology, all the medical technology that we have, we see that it decreases the risk of having a child at that age. There's just one little teensy problem. It doesn't get rid of all the risk factors. It doesn't even discuss all the psychological problems that come with child marriages that I went over in my opening statement, which these guys don't touch on. But it doesn't even get rid of all the factors because there's still higher rates of neonatal death and sepsis. But Daniel rejects all this. Daniel rejects all the medical technology that makes it easier for teenagers to have children and without the higher risks. He doesn't want this. All this technology destroys Islam. You need all the according to him, you need a modern society that produces a secular system to produce the number of doctors you need to get these kind of adjusted results on the orange graph down here. But Daniel rejects that. So by Abdullah citing this, he is basically throwing Daniel under the bus. This is why in my opening statement, I went to studies in sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, India, where there is low technology. Because that's the ideal society Daniel wants. He doesn't want this technology that makes these risk factors lower. He wants the society where we see, a girl is 5 times more likely to die if she has a child under the age of 15. Because he says, we need to have Islam, according to him. We can't have these modern technology because it comes with modernism and feminism and secularism, and that's all bad. So we need to get rid of all that and go back to a simpler world, apparently. So this study is completely useless to help Daniel's position overall when he wants to argue for child marriage. Because you can only say, if you take, according to Daniel, you have a modern secular society with all its technology and doctors, you decrease some of the risks for teens after 15 to have a child. Doesn't get rid of them all even. Doesn't get rid of the psychological issues. Doesn't help girls under 15. But you at least have a slight decrease. But that doesn't work because Daniel's position is completely against this entire system to begin with. So Abdullah, I don't think, realizes that he's just thrown Daniel under the bus. And I don't think Daniel realizes he said these things in the past. Doesn't realize the connection that's being made here. So this doesn't help him at all, according straight from his own mouth. And again, as I noted in my opening statement, it makes sense that we had such high infant mortality rates before modern society. Because if you had girls on average having kids in their late teens, you would have high infant mortality rates. And this is what we see in the ancient world, very high infant mortality rates. Let's get back to what our two friends here are doing with showing how incompetent I am at research, according to them. I'm going to move up a little bit because they just sort of ramble on about this. As you can see, they just keep talking about it, not realizing the irony of their own situation here they put themselves in. But I want to play one important thing they say here after pointing out all these issues.
In this data, they are poor, they are not married, they have been fornicating, they have been possibly smoking more. Actually, I have the paper in front of me. There are more smokers in the 15 to 19 age group. If you don't adjust it for smoking, you will get false results. So
yeah, if you're scientifically illiterate, there's no problem. Like not everyone can study science. That's fine. Not everyone can have a science education. But if you're scientifically illiterate, then you won't even understand like what's the difference between these two graphs. Or if you're like Mike Jones, you'll see one sentence that confirms your bias, and then you cite that, you put that in a chart in a debate, and you run with it.
Or you see one graph and you just put that in your slides and you run with it, right, Daniel? Yeah, I know. Not everyone can do science, like actually read the study. And again, remember, neither Abdullah or Daniel told you where these graphs came from. I told you. I'm probably going to go to a studio in June to do an interview on child marriage. I got invited to. I'm probably going to bring this study with me and use it as my argument against child marriage, against teen pregnancy. Muslims have a really bad habit sometimes of giving me papers I can use against their position. I'm going to use this Washington State study. Thanks, Abdullah. This is going to help me make arguments against child marriage. Because even with all the technology, you can't get rid of all the risks. This is how bad they are at this. They don't want to show you the study because they know what it says. Well, at least Abdullah does. I don't know if Daniel does. But it doesn't support their position in the long run. This is the level of deceit and lies they are doing in their hangout to try to justify grown men marrying, abusing, and impregnating young girls. It's sickening. It's disgusting. And that's why I'm doing this. We're not going to stand for this nonsense. All right, let's move up a little bit here, just 2 minutes, because all they do is sort of rant, and then they play a couple more of my clips, and we'll get to that section here. They move on to the next paper I have. And I told you they spend most of their time on the first two papers, and then they ignore a lot of the narrative reviews I cite. But we'll cover them here. The illnesses, like obstetric fistulas. In Mali, the maternal mortality rate for girls 15 to 19 is 178 per 100,000 of life.
Sorry, go ahead.
This paper, I checked every sentence. It never says girls under 18 are more likely to die from obstetric fistulas. It never makes any kind of claim that obstetric fistulas are more common in the...
That's false. All right. I'm going to have to pull the paper up. So let me find it here. Health consequences of child marriage. And again, I will just show you what the paper says because they don't want to do that. So bear with me while I pull it up. So here's the paper. Okay, let's just read the abstract. Despite international agreement on national laws, marriage of girls under 18 of age is common worldwide and affects millions. Child marriage, okay, so under 18 is a human rights violation that prevents girls from obtaining education, enjoying optimal health, bonding with others their own age, maturing, and ultimately choosing their own life partners. Child marriage, that is under the age of 18, as just defined above, is driven by poverty and has many effects on girls' health. Increased risk for sexually transmitted diseases, cervical cancer, malaria, death during childbirth, and obstetric fistulas. Abdullah, it says it right in the abstract. Did you not read this paper thoroughly? It says it right in the abstract, dude. So yes, she does say there is an increased risk for obstetric fistulas. And I'll cite some more research here in a little bit to prove that, or well, to demonstrate that, because I hate using the word prove anyway. But yeah, maybe he was looking for the direct sentence. But again, I was paraphrasing. This isn't hard. Just read the paper, dude. I mean, there's a lot. Read this section, children delivering children. It talks about this. I pulled stuff from this as well. My opening statement. Mike, you don't understand. He checked every sentence. Yeah, I guess he did. He checked every one except the abstract in this whole section here. But remember, they're claiming I'm the incompetent one. Got a lot of projection, guys. A lot of projection.
The under 18 age group than any other group. The paper never makes that claim.
This is the Mali paper.
Yeah, so this is a paper from Boston, written by Naval Noor, the head of the OBGYN department in Boston.
Okay, notice they've just noted that Naval Noor is a relevant expert. She's head of the OBGYN department in Boston. Okay, now they're about to poison the well, even though she's she has credentials in this field.
And the author is actually a disciple of that Egyptian feminist. What was her name?
Nawal Saadawi.
Yeah. She that person is the mentor of the author of this paper.
Really?
And yeah, absolutely.
Wow, okay. Well, bro, and, you went deep. You're like doing background.
Bro, I was checking early life. Like I was sitting there in the emergency department checking early life all night last night.
MashaAllah.
But yeah, so
Allah bless you.
Yeah, he went so deep he just forgot to read the actual paper itself and decided to resort to arguments of poisoning the well with the study, with the not the study, but the paper author here. So yeah, he went real deep, guys.
You did your homework.
Yeah, as much as I could. So this paper is a review article written by a feminist. All the data cited in this paper are sub-Saharan data. These are basically from countries with no healthcare or very little healthcare. And the paper talks about things like, in people with...
Yeah, I went to countries with little healthcare because, again, Daniel has argued he wants Islam away from Western societies where they have advanced healthcare. And you guys heard him. He claimed you can't have the modern secular society and all the technology we have without going down that road. So why do you think in my opening statement I focused on these countries? Abdullah is just, I guess, blissfully unaware of Daniel's actual position here. It's scary that that's what Daniel actually wants.
People with malaria and HIV who then get pregnant, they have a very high risk. Like, yeah, I could support that. If you have malaria and HIV, please don't get pregnant. Please get treatment first. I could support that. The one time this paper cites fistula statistics is from Niger, from basically one of the poorest countries in the world.
Yeah.
And even then, it never makes a claim that girls are more likely to die from obstetric fistulas. It mentions fistulas as one of the things that could happen, and then it describes to the audience what a fistula is. It never actually makes a claim on epidemiology or that being more likely in girls.
Okay.
And yeah, he's about to cite the Mali data saying 178 out of 100,000. So
It's in the same paper.
yeah, it comes from the same paper. It actually, another paper makes that claim, and this paper quotes from that paper. I went back to the original paper that makes this claim, and the claim is accurate. That is the raw numbers. That is the raw maternal mortality numbers. That out of 100,000 live births, the mother dies in 178 of them.
Okay. Notice the claim being made here, and I want you to watch for Daniel's reaction. It's pretty sickening.
Or if we put in percentage numbers, 0.1%, which he claims to be a death sentence, basically.
Yeah.
And
Daniel just thought it was funny that you're more likely to die if you're having a child between 15 and 19, because it's only like 0.1%. So those 100 girls, they're just a number to him, apparently. Those extra 200 girls that die in these countries from having children between 15 and 19, those are just numbers to these. Look at how happy he is there and the nice little screenshot we got. Oh, it's just 0.1%, guys. Who cares? We can still go after and abuse children and use them for sex. And it's fine because only a couple hundred are going to die. This is sickening. Oh, and by the way, this doesn't even cover the fact that the paper also points out even the mortality rate for children under 5 years can be 28% higher for children born to young mothers. So children born to young mothers, they have a 28% higher death rate because these young mothers just don't have the mental maturity to raise them yet. So this is only the numbers of live births, is what you see on the screen. It doesn't include children that die after this point from having mothers that are just too young. But it's funny to them because it's just 0.1%, guys. It's not that big of a deal. It's okay. We can still go out and abuse children and have child marriage because, it's just 0.1%. Some of us think those 100 girls are worth it, Daniel. Some of us think it's definitely worth it to abolish child marriage if we can save an extra 100 and 200 women. Maybe you should stop looking at them as actual numbers. And this is what we're dealing with, ladies and gentlemen.
And the lower number is 32 out of 100,000, which is 0.03%.
No.
And again, these are raw numbers. This does not control for anything. This is just taking the numbers from a page of statistics. This is taking the numbers from a page of maternal deaths. So what this does not account for is, he has it on the slide right here. He mentions it tries to drive the point home. This does not control for anything. This could be poor girls in tribal areas versus more socioeconomically advantaged urban girls giving childbirth.
Right.
And one important thing that this does not take into account is parity. So parity,
it's often hard to control in these very poor regions for those kinds of things. But again, if you compare them with women in their 20s, again, there's a clear correlation here that if girls are more likely to die 15 to 19 compared to women in their 20s, this is what Nora is pointing out in the paper. There is a correlation here, but it's hard to control in these types of regions.
In medical terms, refers to how many times has this person given birth.
Right.
How many times has this person given birth? This is called parity. And if you're giving childbirth, if you're doing a vaginal delivery for the first time, that's called primiparity. Primiparity is a massive risk factor for all kinds of obstetric, obstructions, obstructed labor, fistulas, and terrible outcomes if you don't have access to cesarean. If you can't get a C-section, that is a risk. That is true. So basically, what happens is if you have a narrow pelvis, if your pelvis is not large enough, and you live in the good old times, you live in the earlier centuries or in a area with no medical, no hospitals, no surgical interventions available. So if in that kind of situation you undergo pregnancy and you try to give birth, there's a risk if your pelvis is too small that the baby will just not come out. Baby's head is sometimes larger than the pelvis.
Right.
Do
you guys remember earlier when Abdullah was talking about how at this age the pelvic floor is still only 85% widened? Now he's basically proving the point for me that, yeah, this is an issue when your pelvic floor is not fully developed. The head cannot get through. This is why we see young mothers develop things like obstetric fistulas and have problems with obstructed labor. he's basically pointing out to what I noted earlier: a 12-year-old girl has not cannot completed puberty and should not be having children because her pelvic floor is not fully developed.
In modern hospitals, we quickly slice the belly open carefully, pull the baby out, and we put everything back together, and we stop any bleeding, and that solves the issue.
Yeah, in modern hospitals. But again, Daniel has argued that Islam is going the direction of modernism with all the technology and more doctors is a bad thing. He doesn't want this. He's got to defend child marriage, young teen pregnancy in its more natural state, where you don't have all the technology, Abdullah. I don't think Abdullah is aware of Daniel's full position on this. That's why I played the video earlier.
In all the claims that he's about to make are taken from African countries with no surgeons available, and basically it's under more poor standards of care. And if a girl has
that's the point.
Obstructed labor, it's basically going to end up as the death of both the mother and usually the child. So, and he's going to keep citing these African studies about the obstetric fistulas and high mortality rates in girls 15 to 19. Like I said, so the thing is, these studies, these numbers are not controlled or adjusted for anything. And most importantly, they are not adjusted for parity status. So if you give birth for the first time when you're 16 and it gets obstructed, if the baby cannot come out, you are going to have a bad time.
Right.
And if this happens at 16, the mother usually has some terrible complications, and she cannot give birth again when she's 20 to 34 years of age. Mm-hmm. If there's going to be an obstruction, it usually happens on the first childbirth, and there will not be a second time. This study does not control for this. The American study that we looked at actually controls for this. The parity status, if this is the first time if this is the first time that the pregnant person has given birth or not. And the American study actually shows, parity status has a massive effect on obstetric complications, and it actually shows that younger girls have less obstetric complications, 40% less in the American study with 1 million people done in an area with excellent healthcare.
Okay, so according to Abdullah, they have 40% less obstetric fistulas when you have the proper technology to care for them. Okay, I'm not sure how accurate that is. Could be the case. Seems like it might be right. But again, this is with modern medical technology. Daniel's trying to defend the opposite. We'll get to fistulas here in a second. I'm going to cite some more. I'm going to cite a clinical review on them. Let's let them finish their thoughts, and then I'll jump ahead a little bit because they're going to start talking about fistulas again.
Right.
So again, I guess if you multiply 32 by 5, you get something like 178. So that could be the source of the UN claims, about 5 times more likely to die in childbirth. Right. Like I said, this is raw statistics. This is not actually adjusted for anything.
Sure.
And an honest researcher would adjust this number for parity status.
Right. Yeah. So this is another wrinkle in the data that if you don't have,
it's not available. That's the point. There's still a pretty strong correlation when you compare women in these poor regions that are in their 20s versus those that are not. I'm going to move ahead because Daniel just sort of rants here for a little bit. And I want to get more to the actual data. So let's move ahead where we start talking about fistulas again. Paper says girls 10 to 15 are especially vulnerable because their pelvic bones are not ready for childbearing and delivery. Their risk of a fistula
doesn't say that.
Doesn't say that?
It doesn't actually say that. No.
Which quote?
When he said girls are more vulnerable because all that stuff.
Their pelvic bones are not ready for childbearing and delivery. The risk for fistula is 88%.
Yeah, so it doesn't actually say that the girls are more likely to develop. I mean, the quote that he pulls is from the United Nations Children's Fund, Fistula in Niger. Okay. And that paper doesn't actually make a argument that it is more common in girls. And the American data shows that it is less common in girls. He's talking about obstructed labor, exploding private parts and all that. He tries, the feminist author is basically trying to scare people by talking about these complications. But the American data and even some African data show that this is less common in girls. Actually, girls, like almost every good study shows this, almost every high quality study shows that in developed countries like UK, US, girls have less obstructed labor. They are less likely to require C-section. Younger mothers are less likely to require C-section.
Right.
And again, just complete misrepresentations and low quality papers that don't actually make the claims that he's trying to make.
Yeah, this is actually considered, in certain cases, it can be considered academic fraud, actually, or like plagiarism in academia. Like if you're
Okay. Abdullah said you're less likely to need a C-section or develop a fistula if you're a teen mother. It isn't citing any research to show that, so I don't know where he's getting that from. Let's go to the actual reports here on this stuff, because you know I came prepared. So let me just, okay, here's the actual report. Let me share my screen here. So this is the updated reports on obstetric fistulas. Again, a ton of research cited. They basically went all out and they included additional African countries. And yes, they're noting that there's a higher rate for fistula for young age. Fistula is a condition that often develops during obstructed labor when a woman cannot get a cesarean section. Okay, obstruction can occur due to malnutrition in pregnancy at a young age. Okay? In countries which facility-based assessments were conducted, it was learned that many of those who suffer from fistula are under 20 and some are as young as 13. Results in a situation where women, especially young women, are at high risk. Okay, so this is a full-blown report. They cite a ton of research to support their case. They go through multiple countries. And yeah, young women are at a higher risk for fistula. But let's just put aside the report because we're all going to say, oh, this is just some feminist nonsense, as they're going to dismiss it by poisoning the well or committing a genetic fallacy. Let's pull up another paper. Okay, risk factors for obstetric fistulas, clinical review. Let me get you that so I can put it on the screen here. Because again, I will show you the studies, unlike these guys. The right one. No, that's the wrong one. That's in my old window that I haven't closed. Let me get the actual one here for you guys. Sorry about that. Here it is. Okay, risk factors for obstetric fistula, a clinical review. Right in the abstract. Teenagers account for 88.9 to 86% of obstetric fistula patients at the time of treatment. So depending on the paper you read, you're going to get those numbers. So again, close to the 88% one. This is a completely different research paper, though. So no, my sources are not entirely inaccurate, even if the numbers are slightly off. But let's go down to the conclusion. You can see here, anytime it can be between that, based on their things. When we get to the discussion, here's what they say. Primary studies found a higher rate of obstetric complications in teenagers. Unfer et al. Reported a higher rate of cesarean section in teenagers compared to women in their 20s. Also reported a higher incidence of lower birth weight infants and acute intrapartum distress in adolescent mothers. The increased obstetrical risk in teenagers can partially be explained by anatomical immaturity. Teenage pregnancies account for a higher proportion of all pregnancies in developing countries. These findings suggest that efforts to reduce obstetric fistulas should target teenagers. So Abdullah said that even African data shows that, oh, if you're a teenager, you're less likely to have an obstetric fistula. No, clinical review says the opposite. Now, yes, most of these papers were done in African countries, underdeveloped countries. But again, the reason why I keep citing them is, what does Daniel say? He doesn't want to look at Western data because he thinks Islam needs to move away from that, move away from the technology and modernism, because he doesn't think you can get modern secularism and feminism without, he doesn't think you get all the technology, industrialism, the doctors, without also including modern feminism and secularism, these things. So it doesn't work. Again, I would really like to know Abdullah's credentials. I'm not saying he's not a doctor, but I am skeptical, given the things, so many things he has said completely contradict the actual data that I can show you guys. So I have no clue where they're getting this stuff from. And it's just, he'll make claims and they won't show a study, or they'll show you just part of the study. It's ridiculous. Okay. Let's get back. Where are we at now? Okay, so they're about to concede a point. And I'm going to talk about that for a little bit. And then we're going to move on to the narrative reviews, because they don't want to show you those parts. But I will show you what the narrative reviews shows.
You're a graduate student.
Where am I at? Oh yeah. This is Daniel just ranting.
And you cite, like, you don't properly cite the primary source, or you make it seem like the primary source or the secondary.
I want you to remember that, though. Daniel said, if you're a graduate student, you don't cite the primary source. Wait till we get to when Daniel starts citing papers, and you guys are gonna have a laugh.
Source is a primary source without verifying the primary source, then this is considered like academically dishonest. So
remember, it's academically dishonest, guys. Remember that when Daniel starts citing papers.
but really, when he quotes, when he shows this on the screen on his slide, and he has this quote next to this paper. Yeah, this paper does cite this data, but it's not a study that has established this as its conclusion. It's just citing this, but it's
You're right. We should move it down to it can be as high as 86%. You guys caught me. According to clinical review, it's only 86%.
taking it from the UN, and he's not checking the UN source to see what is like the source of that data. When you do check it, it actually is the opposite. As you described, like the actual medical data shows the opposite of what the UN, even the UN, is citing for their ideological purpose. So this is very either sloppy or he's being dishonest.
Yeah, I think he doesn't actually know how to go back to primary sources.
Yeah. All right, let's continue.
As high as 88%.
Pause for dramatic effect.
It's funny how it's sad that they find that funny.
8%. Yeah.
Additionally, mortality rates are 73% higher for infants born to mothers than their children. Even the mortality rate for children under 5 born to child mothers can be 28% higher than those born to mothers over 20.
Okay, so this is also from where these citations.
Mm-hmm. So let's see, where did he pick this out from? But I'll be honest, I looked into multiple sources. This could be accurate. This could be possible. A lot of high quality sources show that at younger ages, at very young ages, the babies are more likely to be premature. They come out smaller. At 13, 14, 15, 16, the babies actually do come out a little smaller, according to all the data I could find.
Yeah.
So yeah, this could be true. And perhaps because they are smaller.
Remember in the first study I cited showed that infants, they said it had no regression model. It's useless. It doesn't actually prove this. And it showed that infants born to child mothers have low birth weight. There's a higher rate of spontaneous abortions, these kinds of things. Abdullah here is confirming that study is right when he says this stuff. So what was wrong with me citing it if it's saying accurate things?
There's less need for C-section. There's less risk of obstruction when you control for all other variables. And we could basically concede this. Maybe extremely young childbirth ages lead to smaller babies, preterm births, and those babies are at a slightly elevated risk of death or adverse events. So if a girl gets pregnant at 14, she might not have the largest baby, she might not have the most developed baby, but at 15, 16, 17, this effect begins to fade away also, and it quickly approaches the optimal birth weight age. And I think I looked at the American data. It looks like the optimal outcomes for the baby is actually reached at maybe 30 years of age, 25 to 30 age range. So that could be true. And what it does is it protects the mother from obstructed labor. If the baby is smaller, there's less risk of getting obstructed and dying during childbirth. And
all right, well, they've conceded a point. Let me remind you what Daniel said in his debate with Tom Jump about 2 hours and 17 minutes in. He said, I don't reduce morality to harm. I said that harm is morally relevant. There are many different moral considerations. Harm is one of the big ones. And also, I don't necessarily think that minor marriage is always harmful. And that's actually the consensus scientifically. So now Daniel can never make that kind of claim again. Because here he is hefty concede with his co-host that there is harm, low birth weight, infant issues. Their Washington State study reports harm in young mothers between 15 and 19. Doesn't talk about girls under 15, though, where the pelvic bones have not fully widened yet. So he can never again claim that child marriage causes no harm by this. He's got to admit that, yes, it does cause extensive harm across the board, or not across the board, but at least in some ways. Now, that's not even including all the psychiatric issues. That's not even including other issues that I've covered, like they're in the Washington State study, the sepsis issue, neonatal death, these kinds of things. So we do see harm. caused from child marriages. What benefits do we get from child marriages? Daniel has still given none. There is no moral reason for child marriages. We've never seen that given. We've never seen any sort of good things that come out of them. So why would we encourage them if we do see harm and nothing good ever comes out of them? That's not been answered yet. And Daniel still to this point has not given us any reason to think that child marriages are more beneficial than the harm they cause. And here they are conceding on a very important point.
And yeah, the first baby might be small, but this does not affect the subsequent babies.
Because the woman, of course, it's not going to affect the subsequent babies because the woman would have aged more. What sort of argument is that?
Right. Yeah. So it goes back to the point that we can concede that there's an optimal age for the mother to give birth to a child.
It's not 9, Daniel. It's not 12. Definitely isn't. And that's what you would have to try to justify with Muhammad.
But if that doesn't mean that we would make illegal, or we would say it's immoral or it's unacceptable for anyone to have a child outside of that narrow optimal range. So
yeah.
There's also no reason to go below that optimal range. There isn't any. And again, this isn't even including all the psychiatric issues.
And he didn't want to make that argument either. Like, because in the debate, I constantly pointed out this fact that, look, the risk factors of having a child after 35 when it comes to mortality, infant mortality, and these problems, that's also heightened at over 35. But you're not in favor of banning women from reproducing after the age of 30.
Because, Daniel, as I tried to point out to you, but you kept interrupting, we don't see the psychiatric issues, and women over 45 can consent to that. They have the mental capacity to understand the risks and can go along. A 15-year-old doesn't. It should be obvious. Okay, yeah, let's keep going here because I want to get to an important point they're going to make.
Age of 35 or having sex after the age of 35. So this is an inconsistency that he couldn't address.
Yeah. And then he's going to cite infant mortality rates. And the numbers in this paper are infant mortality rates in this paper that is cited from another paper are 18% if the mother is under 18 and 11% if the mother is over the age of 18. So it is 18% versus 11% infant mortality. Now, these are very large numbers. I would say there are other issues that need to be fixed. Like even for the 11% infant mortality, that would be unacceptable in any country with modern medical care.
Right, but this is like Niger or Mali.
But again, Daniel, you've argued against having more doctors and more technology. We played the video. I don't know how you can justify this.
Yeah, I think the 18% is from Mali. Yeah.
Yeah, let's continue.
As noted, many of these poor girls were not allowed to mentally mature, and they lacked the ability and education to properly care for their children. A 2022 study found that girls who married under 18 were more likely to be physically, emotionally, and sexually abused by their husbands in 14 of the 16 countries they looked at, with strong correlations in 6. Additionally, they know
all of them are sub-Saharan.
What was that?
All of these countries are in sub-Saharan Christian Africa, just to clarify.
Yeah.
I think he's citing from the paper Association Between Girl Child Marriage and Intimate Partner Violence in Sub-Saharan Africa.
Right.
And yada yada from Nigeria.
Right.
Applications are.
Let's be clear. A lot of the countries that were used in this study, a lot of them are Muslim countries, not just Christian. They included Mali, which is 95% Muslim. Nigeria is 50% Muslim. Chad, 55% Muslim. Ethiopia is 33% Muslim. Tanzania is 34% Muslim. So there's a lot of Muslims that were included in these. But also, I was waiting just in case I got the opportunity. There's also something else about that study that needs to be noted is that, let me find it here. They actually are trying to repeat one of the arguments of a prior paper, which they cite in there. Abdullah should have been aware of this if he would have looked at it more closely. So in that paper, they mentioned this one. Child marriage and intimate partner violence, a comparative study of 34 countries. And yes, they go to all sorts of countries that are predominantly Muslim, Christian, you name it, and show across the board. Typically in child marriages, there's domestic abuse due to the dynamics in power. The man is just going to start to abuse the poor girl, unfortunately. They're not equally matched, I guess you could say. So they shouldn't be together. So yes, multiple studies have found this. I can cite another one as well. One of the reviews I cited for example. What is the name of that review? Reproductive and sexual health consequences of child marriages. Here it is. So here's this review. Again, this one also found the same thing. Vulnerability to sexually transmitted diseases, physical and sexual violence. I cited this one directly in the paper, in the opening statement. A lot of issues coming from child marriages. But generally, there's an extreme uneven power dynamics between the males and the females, mainly because of their age gap. This leads to domestic violence in these. And by the way, studies I said in my opening statement had regression models, but Abdullah doesn't want to talk about them here. They've counted for poverty. They accounted for these types of things. Abdullah wants to ignore that fact, though, because it's inconvenient for his rhetorical goals here of allowing men to abuse and marry children. It's rather unfortunate. I mean, there's just so much data out there. Someone just sent me this recently. I've not had time to read it yet. But I'll share my screen and just show you that just the amount of data that we find. Okay, among Syrian female adolescents residing in Turkey, child marriage is associated with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. More than 1/10 of the offspring of childbirth displayed developmental delays. 12% were diagnosed with globally developed developmental delay. I mean, like, the amount of problems we get from child marriages is just staggering. And these guys are just ignoring all of this, trying to dismiss it all under the rug as if it's not bad. Notice that most of what Abdullah focused on was just that, okay, there's some complications in live births with young mothers, but that can be dealt with modern technology, which Daniel rejects. But they don't deal with all of the mental issues, psychiatric issues, the emotional issues, the fact that you put these girls in relationships that they're going to be abused in. So, I mean, there's just so much data out there, and they don't want to talk about that, unfortunately. But we're about to get to something rather interesting here. They're going to get a little racist. So I just want to prepare you guys for that, especially Abdullah.
Are the leading cause of death among adolescent girls in these regions. A review of the literature found that multiple studies have found the same result. They say the reason is because there is an extreme uneven power dynamic between the male and the female, mainly because of the age gap. The females, who lack decision-making abilities, constantly deal with harassment from their husbands and in-laws and are socially isolated. The review agrees with other research I cited that child mothers are likely to suffer from pregnancy-related complications, depression, and inadequate parenting skills. Another review shows.
Whoa. Abdullah doesn't have anything to say about that? He just ignores it? And these guys refuted me? Notice how they just sort of ignore that. Interesting, huh? They don't seem to really care about that. Are they conceding on that point as well? That'd be interesting. Let's go back to that actual paper here. I just talked about it. Let me close. I have so many windows open, unfortunately. Here it is. Okay. Child marriage, as a result of poverty, has many adverse consequences on reproductive and sexual health of girls. These include death during childbirth, physical and sexual violence, isolation, depression, cervical cancer, and risk of sexually transmitted disease. Teen pregnant mothers are at a high risk of preterm delivery, as well as neonatal death. That was confirmed in Abdullah's Washington State study, and more than other women. They note a lot of issues: isolation, depression, psychological harm. Child marriage increases the risk of psychological and physical problems. Neonatal risks, these things. The other review, I can pull that up as well. Actually, I did more than one, but I did another review later in my opening statement. They don't even get to as well. They just ignored these reviews I cited. And child marriage is rooted in sociocultural practices and religious beliefs in many communities. It's associated with all sorts of harm. Okay. Childbearing risk for greater complications and morbidity. Research there. Girls who are married young are subject to intimate partner violence experiences, higher rates of unintended pregnancies, induced abortion, pregnancy complications, low birth weight in children, mental health leading to depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder. Early marriage can affect a girl's physical and mental well-being in a number of ways. Young experience higher rates of malnutrition, isolation, depression. Again, it's it's sad that Abdullah and Daniel just wanted to skip over the reviews. And these reviews cite multiple studies to show this. But that was not apparently important to them. They just wanted to focus on the initial studies I was laying groundwork in and then move on without really going much into that. But we're about to get to some pretty scary remarks from these two.
There's evidence of stunted social development, depression, and anxiety in multiple studies. Here's another study which shows child marriages cause young girls to have more suicidal thoughts and attempts. They say the study's findings are compatible
with Ethiopia.
In Ethiopia.
He forgot to mention in Ethiopia, Christian Ethiopia, sub-Saharan.
Yeah, he's just citing this stuff with zero irony. Like these are Christian groups. Like these are Christian practices, and the thing is that those Christians haven't got the memo from the superior West that, hey, doing is barbaric and wrong. They're like, oh, we've just been practicing Christianity like this from what we've learned for generations from Christians who colonized us. Missionaries. So this is he has like no sense of history or geography. He just, again, Googling and then finding stats and putting it on a slide. Yeah, and the paper he cited as association between child marriage and intimate partner violence in sub-Saharan Africa, 14 out of 16 countries. They find intimate partner violence rates of 36% in girls under 18 years of age and 32% in girls over 18. So he's comparing 36% to 32%. So I guess he's okay with 32% intimate partner violence rates.
No, that's just false. I'm showing there's an elevated risk. I never said 32% was good, man. You need to really take things into context. Showing there's an elevated risk does not mean you think that any of it is good. What sort of ridiculous argument is that?
As long as the woman is over 18, that's fine. I think that's what he's trying to argue, maybe. But I mean, yeah, I agree with the conclusions of this paper. I agree that you should not marry your daughter to a sub-Saharan Christian African. I can wholeheartedly agree with that. Don't give your daughters in marriage to Christians, sub-Saharan Christians.
Who's like sex?
What's wrong with them? That sounds a little racist. What's wrong with sub-Saharan Christian men? You guys are racist against people from that region?
Actually promiscuous, probably has HIV, and
whoa, let's back up a little bit. What are you saying there, Daniel?
Wholeheartedly agree with that. Don't give your daughters in marriage to Christians, sub-Saharan Christians.
Who's like sexually promiscuous, probably has HIV, and
yes, he's going to start citing that stuff now after this, I believe.
Yeah, it might not be a good idea, but
yeah.
But
that wasn't racist at all, was it, guys? Yeah, sub-Saharan men are just filled with HIV, and you don't want to trust them. There's something wrong with them, and we're about to see Daniel realize he may have said something he shouldn't have. Watch this.
But if we say that minor marriage is acceptable, then it obviously means that we're fine with these kinds of sub-Saharan Christian practices. That's what we have to defend.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. If I was married to an Ethiopian man, I would probably be suicidal too. I agree.
Wow. Abdullah, are you a little racist against Ethiopian men? What was that? You're a physician in New York, and this is how you treat people? This is what you think of people that are of a different race than you? Wow, that was racist.
Oh, come on. That's going too far.
Yeah. See, Daniel realizes that, it was at that moment Daniel realized he messed up.
There are Ethiopian Muslims, and there
are Ethiopian Muslims, our brothers, and we love them. But yeah, he is citing Christian Africa studies, basically.
Okay, let's talk about the study. Again, this one had a regression model, Abdullah. You're not acknowledging that. So it accounted for other variables like poverty and status as well. They make no argument that it actually comes from, I'll just pull it up here. Give me a minute. So they make no actual argument that it comes from Christianity. Okay. They were arguing earlier that you can't show that all these harmful consequences come from child marriage. There's just correlations. But now they want to say, oh, no, this is clearly coming from Christianity. No evidence of that. Let me show you the actual paper. Okay, yeah. Okay. We're significantly more likely than girls who were never married to process and have suicidal thoughts in the past 3 months. Okay. Child marriage was associated with increased was child marriage in running the model that was associated. Look, they factored in things, as you can see, like age, Christianity, current employment, school status, all these things. They ran the regression model. It was not associated with Christianity. It was associated with child marriage. Let's look at some other research here. Let me just put on my full screen here. I don't like doing that because it does this big zoom thing right away, but it's kind of necessary sometimes. Okay. So again, here's the study. Religion, self-regulation, self-control, associations, implications. Okay, these guys note that when looking at Christians, including Christians, Jews, and Muslims, they tend to score higher on higher rates of self-control. Notice in this, and they note in their review of the literature, it is worth noting that even though most of the research reviewed herein was conducted in North America with people who were predominantly of Christian backgrounds, okay, the evidence gathered from people from other nations or from other religions is generally consistent with the conclusions. And what are they basically noting? They're noting that Christians have higher rates of self-control. Not likely to, hurt people. You need to see another one? Okay. This one here. Religious involvement, domestic violence of U.S. couples. And they looked at a pretty large sample size here. So let's see. Let me see if I can get the sample size. Here it is. Yeah, 13,000 men and women ages 18 and older residing in the U.S. What they found was that, for instance, in some commentators have suggested conservative Protestant churches tend to be more singing among problems of domestic violence. So what they basically concluded is that basically church attendance, regular church attendance, was associated with lower rates of domestic violence. And you can go through this and see this in the conclusions and everything. So yeah, Christianity is associated with higher rates of self-control, lower domestic violence. You can also check out a video I did called Is Christianity Harmful?, where I show numerous research it's associated with lower levels of aggression, drug delinquency, violence, crime, these types of things. But Abdullah and Daniel here, who have not done a lot of research, just want to say that in this study on suicide, that it's associated with Christianity. This is Christianity causing it, which they don't ever claim. But then they claim I'm misrepresenting the research. And of course, Abdullah doesn't want anyone to be married to an Ethiopian man for some reason, because apparently he's got some racist tendencies toward them. But also it's important to note, we're the one saying child marriage is harmful. Daniel is the one saying, Daniel and Abdullah are the ones saying that if a society became more traditional and allowed for child marriage, things should get better, right? Remember, he said in the debate in his opening statement, a society that abandons child marriage does it at its own peril. So according to Daniel and Abdullah, society should be getting better if there's child marriage. We shouldn't see girls have more psychiatric issues, have an increased risk of suicide, but that's what we see. So this contradicts Daniel's statement. Ethiopia should be doing much better because it has some child marriage. That's what Daniel wants to argue. That's what he tried to argue in his opening statement. A society that bans child marriage does it at its own peril. But we see the opposite. We see things getting worse. Remember, the Muslims here are the ones arguing for child marriage. So we should see it should be making society better, shouldn't it? It doesn't. All right, let's move ahead to the section on divorce. Let's get over these racist comments. I will say, though, Daniel did try to stop him when he started making racist comments. But he just said, there are Muslims that are Ethiopians we like. But apparently, still Christian Ethiopians they don't like.
Strong marriages that do not end in divorce. If he thinks that, he should not be arguing in favor of child marriages.
So I don't know if you looked at these studies, but
I didn't get a chance to go through all of them. Yeah.
Yeah, but again, this is not. Again, it's just like surveying practices that are common. This isn't a medical study or a sociological study that is looking at, well, is the minor marriage causing the divorce, or are there confounding variables? Are there other factors, like maybe the stigma of marrying young, maybe the stigma of those kinds of relationships, the pressure from family, the pressure from society that strains the marriage, that strains the relationship, and causes a higher divorce rate? You have to look at all of those factors. Otherwise, it's just a circular argument, because you're trying to say that the prohibition of minor marriage is justified because, look, the divorce rate is so high. But really, the divorce rate is so high because there's a stigma against child marriage, because it's considered to be unacceptable or immoral. So this is a circular kind of reference. It's not really proving the point that he wants to make.
And again, when he's quoting these papers,
Okay, that's just false. Let's pull them up here. Again, let's pull this here. Here we go. Okay, so here's one of the things I'm quoting from. This was research done, and this is them citing their findings. Okay, so you can see divorce is much higher when you marry in your teens by far, and then it starts to go up again after 40. So as you can see, that's what the actual findings show. Now, we can scroll down and see what they actually say. Okay. Where is the quote I'm looking for? Okay, here it is. None of these variables seem to have, so they have variables, Daniel. They did factor these things in, seem to have much an effect on the relationship between age at marriage and divorce risk. Additional tests reveal that relation seems to function more or less the same for everyone. Male or female, less or more educated, religious or irreligious, intact or non-intact family of origin, and limited versus extensive sexual history prior to marriage. So it has been factored in. Again, teen marriages are more likely to end in divorce, and they factored in other variables. This was not a circular argument, Daniel. Again, here is a, let's pull up another quick one here. I can show you another paper I had ready to go. Age of marriage, age of marital capacity. Okay. If we scroll down to page 5, of marriages entered before age 18. On the other hand, nearly 70% end in divorce. So again, this is coming from legal literature as well. So again, no, Daniel's just absolutely wrong here. It is very likely to end in divorce. And they do factor in other variables.
The few quotes that I was able to check, he is quoting from the introduction or the discussion parts, where the author can write their opinion down as if it was they can write down any opinion that they have in the discussion part or the introduction part, but he is very rarely citing the findings, the results part.
That's just false. You don't actually show that. And discussion parts are not just opinions. They're discussing the implications of their own research. They're not just making stuff up. Discussion sections are pretty frequently used throughout studies. I'm not sure what this is meant to prove.
Right. Yeah, because I mean, that's the thing about scientific papers and scientific research in general. I mean, he tried to dispute this unconvincingly that scientific research does have a bias. Like, it can be affected by social factors and what is considered socially acceptable. So the way that some of these psychological research studies or medical research studies, sociological research studies, what they do is they'll present the findings and then they'll kind of massage it or fudge it or editorialize it in the discussion section, and basically try to assuage the audience or their reviewers that, yeah, these studies might lead to, the findings actually of our research points to an illiberal conclusion, something that contradicts liberalism, something that contradicts our feminist values. But don't worry, actually, there's other factors that we have to take into account, or, this is how you should interpret the data.
None of the studies I cited show results that would contradict what they say in the discussion section, Daniel. And you need to demonstrate that. You're just asserting this without any actual evidence.
In order to preserve the liberal worldview, to preserve that dominant liberal paradigm. So that's the nature of scientific studies, and he didn't want to acknowledge that, even when I gave him the example of like gender affirming care, which we'll talk about in a second.
Oh, we will.
Yeah, and then just to add on to your point, a large amount of numbers, a large amount of papers that he has cited so far have data going back to the UN, the UNICEF, or other international organizations linked to the United Nations.
Irrelevant. Again, because I showed you the actual reports, you can see they're citing studies constantly. Let's move on ahead here a little bit, because they're just going to sort of rant about this stuff, and to save on time, I'm not really that much interested in this. Actually, let me see. Where are they about to go to here? I'll let it play a little bit more here, because I think they're getting to a point I want to address.
And we repeatedly showed this in his references that he was not able to check. Like he didn't know how to check the references and go back.
Ironic.
Back to those. But a lot of his data, a lot of his slogans, the catchphrases come from the UN. And if you go to that feminist paper, Naval Noor paper, that says Health Consequences of Child Marriage in Africa.
Right.
In the at the beginning of her review, she says, since 1984, the United Nations and other international agencies have attempted to stop child marriage. This is how she begins the paper.
Right.
And she's basically saying, yeah, this one right here on the 4th or 5th paragraph.
And then she goes on, Abdullah, to explain why, because it's so harmful. See, they're trying to say this is all a conspiracy, that they're coming up with these findings because they want to stop child marriage. Why? Because it's harmful. This has been demonstrated time and time again. You guys have given no evidence that child marriage is actually beneficial in any way possible. In fact, you've had to concede on some points, like problems with infants. So that's why they're trying to get rid of child marriage, because of how harmful it is. You guys actually have to show evidence that it's beneficial, and there's a massive conspiracy to cover up those benefits, which you can't do.
Paragraph. Right after it says United Nations efforts. Yes, there it is. So it says United Nations has had a stated goal of ending child marriage since 1948.
Because we were finding problems. There were reports coming back from doctors abroad of all these problems. And so it started to be studied more. I mean, this is just ridiculous. I shouldn't even have to point this out. They want to say there's some conspiracy since 1948 to prevent Muslim men from having teenagers as wives. Oh, they just want to ruin our fun. It's insane. And again, they've already conceded some points. They've misrepresented the data, as I've shown with their own Washington State study. So let's move ahead a little bit here. I'm going to move to the 46-minute mark. Okay, because they're just going to go on about a conspiracy here. You guys can watch it and see for yourself, but it's not impressive.
Back to the UN programs, or the authors are trying to get UN funding or UN recognition of their efforts.
Right.
And it just all goes back to that international global effort to of the liberal system to outlaw child marriage. And all of these papers basically have undeclared conflicts of interest.
Right.
Okay, guys, just remember, we can never trust anything that comes from Muslim skeptic again, because there's conflict of interest. They have clear biases towards Islam being true. We can't take any of their research seriously. All their articles are flawed. Throw them all out. Abdullah is not, obviously, doesn't know about philosophy. This is just poisoning the well. None of this shows the research is wrong. Of course, people want UN funding, and that doesn't show any of the studies are wrong. But this is just him asserting a ridiculous conspiracy at this point. And again, they've given no moral justification for why child marriage should happen. They've given us nothing. This is just ridiculous. So let's move up here a little bit. I'm going to move to 53 because we've moved past a lot of the medical literature. As you can see, they just skipped over the reviews. They didn't really seem to care about those. Again, all in an effort to show it's okay for men to abuse children in marriages. It's just pretty disgusting.
All sorts of problems that actually harm your overall society. Daniel has also appealed to...
Like, this happens throughout like the debate, and even post-debate. Like, these guys don't understand averages. Like, even in Niger, like if the average age is 18.5, it's an average. That doesn't mean that's the minimum age that marriage is happening. There are a percentage, like depending on the distribution, there's going to be a percentage that is under that average age that are getting married. The debate is about what is acceptable, like what is considered acceptable to society. And in all these other countries, it's acceptable. It's only when industrialization happens and you adopt these liberal norms and these feminist norms, and your society goes through that upheaval of industrialization and development, that those ages start moving up.
Notice you go through all that development, industrialization, you get the medical technology to start helping more teen pregnancies. He rejects that kind of stuff. He doesn't want that, as we've established. But no, Daniel, the point of me citing the average age is to show that there is a tendency to keep showing that most people want girls to wait much more. When you start getting down below like 17, 16, this is like a bell curve thing. Most are gravitating towards these average ages in their country. And again, you're going to have far less around 15, 16, 14 because of the problems that happen. I don't think he realizes the issue here and why this doesn't really support his case, because he wants to argue that it's perfectly normal outside of industrialization and Western society for child marriage to happen just regularly. And that's not the case. A lot of these countries, and in the past, they were moving more towards older ages for girls. Let's get to his, let's get to the past studies, because now Daniel's going to start citing some papers here. So I'm going to go to 5610. Because this is going to be quite funny when I started pointing out in the past that even in the past, people were marrying in late teens. Girls were being married off in late teens, early 20s.
As a child bride, I will contest that. Even medical experts before the...
So let's go to this. So the Michael Satlow reference that he cites is from 2001. And so this is like an old source. There's more recent archaeological data that contradicts this statement that he makes, or this claim that he makes.
Okay, so the book is from the early 2000s. He says that's an old source. It's ironic because later Daniel's going to cite a paper from 1995. he's going to claim is legit. So ironic, Daniel. It's only an old source when it's inconvenient for you.
So let me just share this screen.
Yeah.
So there's an article by David Feinsey, I think is the way you pronounce it. It's from 2022. He's also using archaeological data. So it's an article called Wedding Bells in Galilee, Biblical Archaeological Review from 2022. And basically he says first century inscriptions that list women's age at marriage generally indicate 12 to 17, with the majority at age 13. So this is the data that I was citing in the debate, the citation that I made in the debate from.
Sorry, muted. So yeah, only I could read this actual article from Feinsey here. If only I could read it. Well, it's not like I don't subscribe to Biblical Archaeology Review and get it monthly. So let's pull this up. I got it right here. I actually went and got the actual article for you guys, so you guys can see what Feinsey says. So this is his quote that allegedly debunks Satlow. Okay, this article, just a magazine article, is what Daniel's going to debunk Satlow. That's what he's going to, a magazine article. Here's the quote. There is also artifact and textual evidence of age at marriage for Jewish girls in the 1st century CE. Woman's tombstone, one, for example, might indicate how old she was when she was married. Investigations of sources show that most Jewish girls married between the ages of 12 and 17, with a greater number marrying at 13. No source. No source. He just makes this claim. Sources are just texts. Doesn't make any claim. Now, how did this refute Michael Satlow's work? It doesn't. It's just a baseless claim. Satlow goes through and shows that girls were marrying this young in Babylon. But in Palestine, they were marrying at much later ages, like mid-teens at the earliest. So 15, 16, but mostly late teens, early 20s. So this is Daniel's alleged source on archaeological data that refutes me. Okay, it obviously doesn't. Let's go to another source I have available here from Imram Troper. Let's see, historical marriages. Here we go. Yeah. I'll pull this up now. So, children in childhood in the light of demographics, the late Jewish family, late antiquity. So, again, this is comparable to what Satlow shows. It's not necessarily the same, but you do kind of get the same idea from it. Let me scroll down here. Go to page, was it 315, I think it was? No, 331 is what I'm thinking of. So first age marriage, okay? Scholars suggest the average age of first marriage in Palestine and Western Euphoria was late teens and early 20s for women and around 30 for men, okay? Sources are down here on 123. See them all. Tim Parkins argues, however, that this age differential would probably not have translated into a significant difference in fertility due to the likelihood that the experience of childbirth for a mother in her early teens would lead to deleterious effects that would eventually decrease her fecundity. So even they're noting that in the past, early marriage would have had very damaging effects. Okay. So again, I'm not really sure how this article from Feinsey refutes my claims, because he doesn't mention Satlow. He doesn't respond to Satlow. Doesn't say Satlow's wrong. Satlow gives a much more exhaustive account of the literature from that time period than one guy in a paragraph in a magazine article that I read back in December. All the time. I'm like always 2 steps ahead of this guy. When he cited that, I started laughing. I'm like, I read this. Like, what are you talking about? That's not a good source.
From this article. But there's another research paper, Roman Funerary Commemoration and the Age at First Marriage by Walter Schiedel. It's from 2007. So again, it's more recent than the Satlow study that he cites. And
notice he's not showing you the study again. I'm going to show you the study here in a minute.
And he's looking at like this distribution based on epitaph data, the female age of marriage. So you can see like there's a peak at age 12 to 13 range. And this is what Feinstein is, I believe, also referring to. But you see, even age is younger than.
No, Feinstein would be referring to Jewish. This is Roman. Your studies on Romans, Daniel, not Jewish individuals from the past.
That being common. So we're not necessarily saying that everyone was being married at this age of 12 or 13, but it was happening, and it was not like a rare thing. And this is what the data shows. So Walter Schiedel has like a nuanced discussion because he's trying to determine, like, does this vary significantly between elites, like elite Romans versus lower socioeconomic classes? I mean, there's a nuanced discussion, but in general, the point that's relevant to our debate is, was this an acceptable practice? Was it relatively common? And the answer to both of those questions, according to this research, is yes. Like, it was acceptable, it was common. And
again, in my opening statement, I said child marriage did happen in the past. That's irrelevant. We're arguing, should it be acceptable today, Daniel? Let's pull up Scheidel's paper here, and we'll go through it a little bit. Because again, I want to show you what's actually in the papers. I don't want to just show you a fun little graph I found. Okay, so here it is. You guys can see it for yourselves. Here is the graph he's using. This is on elites of a sample size of 27. This is not representative of the actual common practice at the time. And Scheidel is actually responding to prior research. He notes that it's hard to really tell. His basic argument is that it's hard to tell. Till closer to the age of 20, both cases may produce identical commemorative patterns. All we can say is that since married status can be shown to be most plausibly detrimental of spousal commemoration for deceased men, the most economical solution would be to accept the same explanation for women. So age 20 for women. This is what he says in his conclusion down here. Okay, so here's the conclusion. Well, we're unable to judge whether women usually married in their early teens to mid-teens or in their late teens. The latter hypothesis is more economical, but otherwise hard to substantiate. So what he's arguing is that the data is just sort of limited. It's hard to really tell, but it seems more likely that they were marrying closer to 20. And he does this because it's also comparable to what we see in the Middle Ages. Girls were marrying late teens, early 20s, as he points out here. That seems to better fit with it, even though we can't prove it. So he's not really contradicting my research. He's just saying it doesn't prove it beyond a shadow of doubt. But the papers I cited say that basically. They say that basically. They just say that they seem this is most likely. Scheidel's saying basically the same thing. He's just a little bit more tentative in his conclusion, as you can see down here. So my point with bringing up all this research is to show that Daniel was wrong when he says that before modern Westernism and feminism, most girls were being married off early teens. It's just not the case. Most were moving more towards what the modern standard is. Late teens. Okay. The idea that girls should be marrying after 18 is not arbitrary and was just decided by Western powers. This comes from generations of humans constantly moving more towards these ages. This is why I went over Ken Phillips' book, and I basically pointed that out. So we're going to move up a little bit more here because, again, at this point, we've covered a lot of the medical literature. A lot of what they do is just sort of rambling, not really relevant. I want to cover more important things. So let's move up to 203 is the next time marker I've written down here. Yeah, Daniel, if it's not ideal to be having children at such young ages, girls should not be married off and be having children at such young ages. That's the point. Marriage often leads to children. That's where babies come from. Okay, so they can concede that point. They can agree with me that this is not necessarily the best thing. I wanted to point that out. So let me go back and just play a little bit more of it so you guys can hear that. Sorry, I'm having technical issues here. Didn't do its thing. All right, There we go. Sorry about that. I'll try to cut that out in the post. I want to go back here and I'll just play this for you again. So 20324. Okay, they're talking about people in the past.
At a younger age, then the child is going to be weaker. So that doesn't mean that it's unacceptable or it's a moral violation. But he is taking their description of you'll have weaker children. It's, you know, it's not the ideal age. He's taking that as a prescription that no, you should not. It's unacceptable to reproduce or get married at that age. So this is nothing in these quotes that he's citing actually refers to marriage. Like Soranus is not talking about marriage. Albertus is not talking about marriage. They're just talking about the physicality of childbirth and what is or is not ideal. And like we said earlier, we can concede that point.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they can concede that even ancient authors understood there were problems if women are having children too young. So why would we want them married off when typically in marriages, especially in the past, people were married off to have children? In Soranus of Ephesus, Giles of Rome, Albertus Magnus is saying this is not good. Girls should not be married and be expected to have children so soon. If they're conceding that point, they're recognizing that even people before Muhammad, like Soranus, recognize there were problems with trying to expect girls to have marriage so young. Okay, so again, most people understood this. Why would you argue in favor of child marriage and that it's okay to sleep with a 9-year-old, expect her to have children at such young ages? This is ridiculous. Let's move up to the section on ethics. Okay, so if they're conceding this point, I'm not going to focus too much on it. I'm going to move up to the 27 mark here. Oh, they do cover a video here. I'm going to skip over this that I addressed recently. So if you guys want to see this response to this, I'll show you. We covered and we just addressed this whole thing on here, as you can see. So if you guys want to go to Trinity Radio, we completely addressed this in a recent hangout on Friday, and we addressed everything regarding Numbers 31 and Ezekiel 16. To save time, I'm not going to redo it here, but you can see that there. So again, bad understandings of the biblical text as well. Let's move up to 217 past this part. Let me put this back up here for you guys.
This kind of virtue ethics of Mike Jones. So this is something that we find from modernists. Like
I'm going to go back a little bit. He's claiming virtue ethics comes from Enlightenment thinkers, as you'll see here.
And instead of addressing the clear contradiction. So go check out Quran and Bible blog for more.
Check out my response on Trinity Radio.
I also want to address the this kind of virtue ethics of Mike Jones. So this is something that we find from modernists like Jones, but he's not the source of this kind of reformism, basically, of Christian morality. What Mike Jones is saying is that, no, what Jesus taught is principles. What Jesus taught was love thy neighbor. And then our ethic is based on those principles. When you apply love thy neighbor, you know that minor marriage is wrong. You know that, murder and theft are wrong. It's just one principle, and then all of the rest of Christianity follows. Unlike in Islamic morality, you have to have God tell you, do this, do that. You have to have God and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam give you very specific instructions about like how to cleanse yourself, ritual purity, all of these things. You need God to tell you that explicitly in clear-cut terms, because you're not morally advanced as Christians, where Christians, they are given a very clear principle and there are very clear virtues that they're supposed to cultivate, and then they will, practice a godly way of life. Whereas Muslims, you have to handhold and you have to tell them very clearly, do this, don't do that. You have to tell Muslims 2.5% zakat, charity, as obligatory. Whereas with Christians, you just give a general principle, love thy neighbor, and Christians are going to just give so much of their money in charity. That's the difference between Muslims and Christians, and the difference between Islamic morality and Christian morality. What Mike Jones doesn't know, or what he doesn't want to acknowledge, is that this kind of attitude towards Christian morality is a very modern concept. It's a modern innovation. And you can find the roots of this innovation in the statements of, for example, John Locke. So in an essay concerning human understanding, this is what John Locke says. There are fundamental truths which lie at the bottom, the basis upon which a great many others rest, and in which they have their consistency. There are teeming truths, rich in store, with which they furnish the mind, and like the lights of heaven, are not only beautiful and entertaining in themselves, but give light and evidence to other things that without them could not be seen or known. our Savior's great rule that we should love our neighbors as ourselves is such a fundamental truth for the regulating of human society that I think that by that alone, one might without difficulty determine all the cases and doubts in social morality. Truths such as this we should endeavor to find out and store our minds with.
So some of you Christians are probably laughing at this point because you know what the New Testament says, don't you? John Locke is saying that, like then all basically, everything is basically under the idea of love thy neighbor as thyself. What does the Bible actually say? For all the law is fulfilled in one word: you shall love thy neighbor as yourself. Okay, first of all, he's trying to say that virtue ethics comes from the Enlightenment. Okay, then he cites John Locke. What? John Locke didn't really talk about a lot about ethics, but I don't know of any modern historians that classifies him as a virtue ethicist. In the Enlightenment, virtue ethics was on the decline, guys. Like we had seen the rise of like deontology, utilitarianism, consequentialist ideas. We didn't see this idea of virtue ethics. That virtue ethics didn't really rise and come about until 1950s under G.E.M. Anscombe, Alistair McIntyre, Bernard Williams. This was the resurgence of virtue ethics. And what were they arguing? Enlightenment ethics has got us too far away than what the ancients taught. Okay? We need to go back to what ancient ethics was, what Aristotle taught in the Nicomachean Ethics. Paul quotes Aristotle later in Galatians 5 when he says, against such things there is no law. That's a direct quote from Aristotle's Politics. He quotes from Aristotle in Romans 2:15. So, no, virtue ethics doesn't come from the Enlightenment. That's just silly. That's silly. And ironically, Daniel is showing us that John Locke is basically teaching what the Bible taught. Okay, yes, all the law is summed up in love thy neighbor as thyself. John Locke is actually right here and understands the Bible better than Daniel does. He's trying to say that John Locke is corrupting traditional Christianity. No, he's not. But that's how far removed Daniel is from his understanding of what the Bible actually teaches. And it's very clear that if you read the New Testament, it's more in line with an Aristotelian understanding of ethics. I mean, Paul quotes Aristotle. It's very much a virtue ethics based system. And that's what modern philosophers have been trying to point out. So let's move up. We're going to get to Bruce Ryan now. Moving up to, because he's just going to go on and quote these virtue ethics ethicists. They're going to cover a little bit more in my opening statement. Oh, here we are. Oh, I want to get to this. Let's see here. Because, yeah, we're about to get to the infamous graph that Daniel's going to cite.
Boy attraction was seen just as normal as heterosexual ones. Main interest was in boys early to mid-teens, peaking at about 14. The appeal vanished with the beard. Adult men were scorned if they were passive partners because manly behavior was to be the active. Staggering.
So this is something that comes from Greek and Roman culture.
No, Daniel. If you read Ryan's paper, which you haven't, a lot of that man-boy interaction came from multiple cultures, including Islamic societies. He cites the Greek and Romans as one, but he cites many others, including traditional African Islamic societies, Middle Eastern ones. This didn't all just come from the Greeks and Romans. You never read your source, and we'll cover Ryan here in a little bit.
Pederasty. Yeah, it's like well known. Like this is news to Mike Jones, and many societies adopted this kind of practice, including European societies. But that didn't mean that was socially acceptable. Like he's trying to claim that Islam is okay with pederasty, which is
no, I didn't. I said Islamic societies were okay with it. Let's just pull up Ryan's paper here. So Ryan's paper actually covers this quite in depth. So hard to switch between windows when I'm doing StreamYard. Here we go. Okay, so this is Daniel's paper he's been citing for years. He claims that it was quite pervasive, normal in Islamic societies here. This has been pointed out to him recently by some people on Twitter who did some threads. As you can see here, it was very normal in Islamic societies. Even though it was not permissible under Islamic law, which Ryan knows, it still happened. They still allowed for it quite constantly. And then it ended with Western abhorrence to it. So that's when it ended.
It's completely false. Like this is completely false. And that's not even what Bruce Ryan is claiming. He's just talking about certain practices existing in these cultures, in Middle Eastern cultures, and he looks at Asian, Southeast Asian cultures, African, and European. Like he does a survey. But the thing is that Rind, just because I've cited one aspect of Rind's work, that doesn't mean that I agree with everything that Rind has said. And my arguments regarding
Daniel, the problem is you've cited Rind, and you've cited Rind, and you don't agree with any of his conclusions. None of the conclusions Rind's come to are conclusions you have. So when I put you in this trilemma, and I said, you either have not read Rind, you're lying about it, or you agree with his conclusion that it's perfectly normal for men to have interactions with boys, and you secretly desire that. That's the trilemma you're in, because none of Rind's conclusions align with yours. You're still stuck in this trilemma. Let's again pull back up the paper here. Rind never, ever agrees with Daniel that child marriage should be allowed, that girls do not suffer from any problems when they're suffering from interactions with older men or with men in general. So again, let's go to his, let's go up here a little bit. I'm going to page 7. So here's what Rind says. Child sexual abuse researchers have repeatedly maintained that hemophilic interactions are innately and intensely harmful for the younger person. What does he cite? He cites his own research from 1998 on this. I recently tweeted about this to show Daniel. We can go to the 1998 study and show that it's harmful. So here's the tweet I put up here. Okay, Daniel claims that there's no harm here. But again, look at Rind's 1980 meta-analysis. In general, the findings from the current review suggest that socio-legal definitions of CSA, child sexual abuse, have more scientific validity in the case of female children and adolescents than for male children and adolescents, given the higher rate of unwanted negative experiences for women. So Daniel's just wrong. Rind never agrees with any of Daniel's conclusions. So why has he been citing him? Why has Daniel been citing Rind for so long when he doesn't agree with any of his conclusions? If we go back to the later study that Daniel's been citing on hebephilia, again, child sexual abuse maintain that hemophilic interactions are innately and intently harmful for the younger person. Okay, let's go to his conclusions here now. Okay, in his conclusions, he says he hopes this provides direction for psychiatry, helping those with hemophilic impulses to control their behavior. He even says you can't take his research and use it to argue that it should be practiced or that it's okay. That's a naturalistic or a relativistic fallacy. You can't use his research to argue that. So the problem with Daniel citing Rind for so many years is that Rind doesn't agree with any of Daniel's conclusions. The only conclusion that you can really get from Rind is that, and again, Rind is an outlier in this. He does not represent the mainstream psychiatry. But the only conclusion you get from him is that man-boy interaction is not as harmful as people think it is. That's it. That's it. So for him citing Rind all these years shows he has not read his research. My guess is Daniel just read the abstracts of these papers and assumed he knew what they meant, but he didn't actually go into detail into studying them. So that's the problem with Rind and him citing him. He can't cite Rind because Rind doesn't agree with any of his conclusions, and that's why he still is in this trilemma. Does Daniel agree with Rind that, yeah, man-boy interaction is perfectly normal? Is he lying about it, or did he not read the papers? My guess is he just never read the papers. He only looked at the abstracts.
Minor marriage don't depend on everything that Rind has claimed about anything. So this is like irrelevant whataboutery, basically. Like I never said that Rind is this, the end all be all of everything that he said on this topic. He's just pointed out something very significant, and it's something that's obvious, but people need academic citations. I provide it, and the core is that evolutionarily speaking, as far as biology is concerned,
evolutionary speaking, Rind says you're committing a naturalistic fallacy if you use his data to argue that just because it's natural, it's okay, it is not harmful. He says it's harmful, especially to girls. And again, he's still an outlier.
We don't accept evolution. We say God has created human beings in this way. But if you don't believe in God, then you can say evolutionarily, people have developed to be able to reproduce at puberty, or even at puberty, but even prior to puberty, sexual interaction can take place, a relationship can take place without harm, without physical harm. And this is an evolutionary fact. It's a biological fact. And that's all that Rind paper is pointing out. That's all that I'm citing. Another interesting citation.
Yeah, and it's pointing out you, Daniel. He's pointing out you, Daniel, are committing a naturalistic fallacy when you use his research to argue that child marriage should be acceptable and is not, and is a good thing.
that I mentioned in the open discussion of the debate is related to this concept of hebophilia, is female sexual attractiveness versus age.
Here we go. Daniel's accused me of not doing proper research. Get ready for this.
So they showed the kind of silhouettes, body outlines of women at different stages of development, at different ages. And then they asked men, and they kind of did, like they hooked them up basically to different monitors to gauge the physiological reaction that, so even if they lied about it, they like your body doesn't lie basically, what you're attracted to. So they combined like the biological reading or the physiological readings with the actual question, like, okay, what do you find attractive? So they're showing these silhouettes of women at different stages of development without specifying an age. So there's no number. And then the men have to grade, okay, what do you find more or less attractive?
Wow, guys, he really did his research. He's telling you all the things the study said, didn't he? This is clearly what that study that's cited on the screen says, right? Right, Daniel? You read it, didn't you?
And you can see like starting from age 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 is the peak in terms of what these men who are surveyed in the study, sexual arousal and arousability to pedophilic stimuli in a community sample of normal men. So these are not like people who are suffering from other kinds of psychiatric issues. And this is what they find attractive. So, I mean, people, if you consciously ask them, you know, what do you find attractive? What age? Because of social stigma and because of different modern norms, they're not going to necessarily give you a honest or truthful answer. Or they might consciously not think that that's what they're attracted to. But if you show them a picture and you don't tell them what the age is, then they will find it attractive and their body will react to it. Yeah. So that's all considered pedophilia. That's all considered.
Okay, let's stop here. Daniel has claimed this study on the screen shows this graph that men are most attracted to 14, 15 age region. Daniel did not read the study. I don't even think Daniel looked at this study. Daniel found this graph online, and he assumed that is what the study actually showed. Let's start to go through this. So if you just search for the graph, here's what you find. This graph has been thrown around a lot. Here it is on Reddit. Okay. Here it is. Here you can see the graph is being used here. I've seen it on Twitter. Sometimes you can find the graph. Oh, that's a different graph. But sometimes you can find the graph without it. So here is the graph, as you guys can see, without the citation. Just the graph, no citation. And sometimes you can see it with the citation. It really depends. That graph is not in the paper, ladies and gentlemen. It's not. I think Daniel just saw this graph online, saw the citation, assumed that's what it said, and then ran with it. I read the paper. Daniel, public service announcement. If you cite a paper, expect me to read it. You better make sure you actually read them, because we both know you didn't read this actual paper here. You just found this graph on Reddit or Twitter, assumed it was accurate and went with it. Let's go and see what the paper actually says. It does not say what Daniel says. So here you can see 1995. Again, apparently that's out of date according to Daniel, because Michael Satlow's out of date, but apparently this one's not. Okay, they looked at 80 men from a community of volunteers, so it wasn't a randomized study. They hooked them up to certain parameters to, they hooked their male member parts up to an apparatus to measure arousal, basically, as they showed them different pictures, but they also played audio devices. A quick scroll through this shows, you can see the graph is not in the paper at all. Here's a graph from it, contrast between child-adult, different consensual, non-consensual situations, what would arouse them or not. You can see child is much lower than adult arousal. Again, other graphs. The graph Daniel's citing is not in the paper, ladies and gentlemen, as I told you. It's not in there. Daniel did not read this paper. What they did is they hooked men up, and they basically tested their arousal for attraction to children or adult women. They didn't do these ages. They didn't go like 12, 13, 14, 15. They didn't do that. They just divided them into the two groups. Let me read from the actual paper to show you what they said. Okay, so they noted that, for example, self-reported female pedo interest had a actually low non-statistical response right there. And with that, when it was self-reported, when we get into the actual implications, here's what they say. The slide and audio tape data combined suggest that most normal men are not sexually aroused by nude female children per se, but that some men who report no pedophilic activity are aroused when a female child is depicted as enjoying sexual activity with an adult male. Okay? Thus, arousal of pedophilic stimuli may motivate some, but not all. So those that were actually aroused by children were the minority, is what they say. They weren't the standard. Daniel, again, as I said, all he did was find this graph online, assume that the graph was right, because I found the graph too without looking. He assumed this was right, assumed this was the source, and said, "Oh yeah, this is what this paper shows." It doesn't show this. That this research is not even anywhere in that paper. So Daniel did not even do any research. He probably didn't even look at this paper. This is pathetic research. But this is what he's using to try to justify minor marriage. They went through this whole thing. They said, no, there's no birth complications with young girls having children, which is false, as we've demonstrated. Oh, and most men are actually attracted to young girls. Therefore, he's basically sending out a signal to all these perverted, sadistic men. It's okay to go out and abuse children that are 14, 15, because it's perfectly normal and doesn't cause harm. And he's getting there with deceit, gaslighting, manipulating the data. Guys, this is pure evil. You're using these dishonest, evil tactics to arrive at a conclusion which is going to cause harm to children. But this is where Daniel and Abdullah, who's allegedly a doctor, are coming from. And I'm not going to stand for this. This is pure evil, and we need to expose it. Disgusting and beyond. It's beyond acceptable. Let's move on, though. If I keep going, I'm just going to get angrier that they were actually advocating this for children. But here's Daniel's amazing graph that he found on Reddit or something. Who knows where he got this from? Let me check my next time marker here. Where are we at in this? Okay, we're at 2:40. We've addressed rind. Let's move ahead. We're just going to talk a little bit more about rind. And then I'm going to move to probably closer to the end here.
Islam in the days before Western influence, when big strapping Muslim men could write gay erotic poetry about boys. I just want to say, but again,
what an idiot. What's the trilemma? Like, the trilemma is very easy to get out of this supposed trilemma. Like, I don't agree with everything that Bruce Ryan says or all of his conclusions. Yeah. So what? Like,
and
Daniel, you don't agree with any of Ryan's conclusions. That's why you're still in the trilemma. Ryan never agrees with your conclusion that the sexual interaction with girls, according to his own 1998 meta-analysis, is not harmful. He says that it does lead to harm in what he has found. It's only with the boys or the men that it's not harmful. So this is the problem. This is why you're in the trilemma still. You don't cite Ryan and show me what conclusions you actually agree with on him. You don't agree with any of his conclusions. And again, as I've noted, Ryan is an outlier. Let me again pull up another paper here to show you this. I want to go to, let's go here because this is the study here. Okay, so here's the actual. This is an umbrella study. It includes rind. I can show you that it includes rind. See, here, 49. It includes rind right in there. Their conclusion is looking at 19, I believe it's 19 meta-analyses, that this is harmful. So the findings show that it is definitely harmful and all sorts of psychiatric issues when there is sexual intercourse with a minor. That needs to be rejected because it causes harm, looking at over 559 primary studies covering 28 outcomes. Some of the outcomes were not as robust, but some of the outcomes definitely were. Ryan is an outlier. So even if we just go on what Ryan says, though, Daniel doesn't agree with any of his conclusions. So it shows you how little, again, like with Daniel's graph about the 1995 study, he didn't read it. He's not read Ryan's papers. He's read the abstracts. But as far as I'm aware, I have no evidence. I've seen no evidence Daniel is actually aware of Ryan's actual findings. So let's see, we're at 2740. Okay, I'm going to move to the end now because a lot of this stuff has already been addressed. They just sort of repeat a lot of the same arguments. And I want to get you to the point where they kind of say something they shouldn't. Daniel stops Abdullah at one point here. We'll get to that. Oh, they're talking about the gender affirming care. Let's cover this for sure.
Yeah, this is not necessarily the best thing to go for.
Yeah, okay. So medical experts, he's constantly appealing to their expertise. Like, look at what the medical experts are saying today.
Okay, Daniel, you literally claim you have a doctor on there and you're appealing to his expertise, but apparently when I do it, it's wrong. It's quite a double standard you got going there, buddy.
Yeah.
So gender affirming care and young people. This is from the Office of Population Affairs, which is under the Health Department of Health within the federal government. What is gender affirming care? Gender affirming care is a supportive form of healthcare. It consists of an array of services that may include medical, surgical, mental health, and non-medical services for transgender and non-binary people. For transgender and non-binary children and adolescents, early gender affirming care is crucial to overall health and well-being, as it allows the child or adolescent to focus on social transitions and can increase their confidence while navigating the healthcare system. So this is what the medical experts, as authorized by the federal government, are saying currently. You also have the Lancet, one of the top medical journals in the world. Gender affirming care is needed for transgender children. You can go, and this is from June 2018. You can go read all of the data and empirical evidence that they cite to support that. You also have the New England Journal of Medicine, criminalization of gender affirming care interfering with essential treatment for transgender children and adolescents. So this is what the medical experts at the top of medical science today, at the cutting edge, are saying. So according to Mike Jones, we need to follow this kind of medical advice. We need to follow.
Okay. This is bad. Let's go to some more research here to show that he's misrepresenting the research. Okay. Here's an article. Gender dysphoria is rising, and so is professional disagreement. Some professionals disagree on the treatment of gender dysphoria in young people. From News Medical. So no, this is not the consensus among experts that children need gender confirming care. You know what the consensus of experts is, though? That child marriage is harmful and should be abolished worldwide. Except for apparently this guy that Daniel found on his channel, who won't even tell us his credentials, his last name, or anything about him. And also gets the research on puberty wildly wrong. But yeah, this is comparing apples to oranges. Gender confirming care is a very new thing. It's understudied, unlike child marriage. There's no consensus on it, unlike consensus on child marriage. So just because you can find some studies that say that we need to have gender affirming care, that doesn't mean all professionals disagree. And even a Christian came in later and pointed this out to them. So yeah, this is ridiculous, a ridiculous argument here. I have no clue how he thinks this is an actual point to bring up. It's not a good comparison. So I'm going to go back in and we're going to listen to one last section of all this, and then I'll respond, and then we'll close this out. And we'll get it all done under 3 hours, which is pretty good.
You know, and you grew up and became tall and arrived in full adornment. Your breasts were formed. Okay, again, according to the midwifery and women's health nurse practitioner, that does not happen until 17 when the breasts have been fully formed in a girl. And scholars like Robert Alter, Mark Rucker.
Go ahead, you were laughing.
Simply false. Simply false. You know, let me pull up the numbers. Where is it? There is observable breast development as early as ages 6 and 7 in some girls. In some girls, there is observable breast development.
Okay. I'm pointing out when breast development is complete, sir. Let's pull that up. Let me see. Do I want to let him finish his thought here? Yeah, let's
Initial kind of stages start at 6 or 7. And this is like not a pathological 1 in a million cases. These are 1 or 2% start as early as those ages.
Right.
And at menarche, the kind of breast development becoming full, like he mentions from Ezekiel, that stuff is actually complete in most girls by ages 12, 13, in some girls as early as 9 and 10.
He's saying breast development is complete in some girls as early as 9 and 10. What? Okay, and he says my source does not say that. I'll just put my source up on the screen, ladies and gentlemen. So here's the first one. Okay, let's go down to page 38. Okay, right here. Breast development begins with breast budding around age 9, progresses to conical shape, followed by full development breast with round contour around age 17. Let me zoom in a little bit. Maybe you guys can see it better. It's under 2B. 2B. You see it's right there around age 17. You know what? I got another source. Let's just go to this one. Maybe it's 287 is where I'm at. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Second column, breast development is typically complete by the age of 17 to 18. So I don't know where this guy is getting his numbers from when he says breast development is complete by 12 or 13. Why can I cite actual medical literature that shows the opposite? See, Epidemiology of Chronic Disease, Global Perspectives. Okay, here's my source, Midwifery and Women's Health Nurse Practitioner Certification Review Guide. Okay. Well, I have no clue where this guy's getting his sources from. So let me go back a little bit now in this thing, because I want to cover something Abdullah kind of says here to show who we're dealing with. Okay, let's go back to here.
They have the cutting edge of saying. So according to Mike Jones, we need to follow this kind of medical advice. We need to follow their guidelines. Again, like this is the kind of stuff that I was bringing up in the debate, but he just could not address like these kinds of basic points.
Yeah, and medical experts also recommend, like CDC recommends, human papillomavirus vaccine, the Gardasil, which is a sexually transmitted infection.
Well, let's not talk about that subject because YouTube might have policies on.
Whoa, Daniel, did you just cut off your medical expert pointing out he might be an anti-vaxxer? Is that what just happened? Here he is disagreeing with the CDC on the HPV vaccine? What? That's wrong? So I have a lot of questions about Daniel's so-called expert here. Apparently, he doesn't want to Daniel doesn't want to let him talk about vaccines here. Is he going against what 99.999% of doctors say about vaccines?
Oh,
on talking about certain medications.
No, I am. True. I said the bad word. No, I am talking in favor of it. So CDC, remember, kids, CDC says vaccinate your daughters for sexually transmitted infections starting from age 11 or even 9.
Yeah.
CDC is
we have to follow everything the CDC says.
And please follow them. Girls as young as 9 are under the risk of getting sexually transmitted infections as per CDC.
Absolutely. We would never dream of going against what the CDC says.
Okay. Now, I'm not saying it's verified, but I'm very skeptical of him if he's trying to argue, because he seems like he's throwing shade on the CDC for recommending vaccines. I think I'm going to go with the medical experts on that and encourage girls to get vaccines. So that was a little alarming when I heard that when he was, and Daniel cut him off. So kind of a little bit of funny thing there. Okay, let's recap what we sort of covered here so far. So after this, they just sort of, they just go into the Q&A with different Christians. But again, so let's recover what we covered. They claimed all my research was biased and didn't go back to actual evidence. This is false, as we've demonstrated. They ignored the narrative reviews I cited. They ignored a lot of the psychiatric harm. They conceded some points that it causes problems for infants. They cited this. Where is this one here? I'll pull this one back up. They cited this lovely paper that I'm going to use from now on, because on severe problems of girls in the West, 15 to 19, as they point out. Girls 15 to 19 still suffer from problems that they don't suffer from in their 20s. This Washington State paper. I'm going to use this from now on in the future. So thanks, guys. This is more evidence girls should not be getting pregnant in their teens. They claimed that I lied about research. As you can see, that's clearly not the case. They claim my sources are just feminist think tanks. You can clearly see that's not the case. They misrepresented the research quite often. Daniel decided that it would be good to put up this lovely graph as if it's evidence of something. It's not. This is all fake. This is not what the actual paper says. A lot of issues. Daniel thinks virtue ethics comes from the Enlightenment, which is just false. They got a little racist with Ethiopians, which is really depressing as well, and said that somehow that the girls, because they were married to Christians, meant they were suicidal, even though the study says it comes from child marriage. I mean, yeah, this is what we got from them, and this is what they're using to try to justify child marriage. A lot of problems they came across, and as you can see, this was pretty easy to show. They're very unfamiliar with the research on this. They made numerous problems. I mean, but this is what they're putting up. This is what the levels they're going to. They want to try to justify child marriage. Grown men harming girls, putting them in situations where they're going to be taken out of school, they're going to lack education, they're going to lack power, in these relationships for negotiating purposes. They're going to be abused. They're going to be expected to have children. They're not going to be able to fully mentally develop. I mean, and they're using deceit, lies, gaslighting, insults to get to this point. This is pure evil. And notice how in none of this, they talked about boys, because this was one of Daniel's big arguments, is that children are so sexually frustrated, they need to be married off. But Daniel's a promoter of hypergamy. He thinks the girls want to marry up constantly. And there's some research on that contradicts him on there. But the whole discussion thus far has been about girls being able to marry young. What about boys? It doesn't make any sense. So a lot of problems here with the whole research, and I hope this was helpful. I don't want to see Daniel using this as evidence it's okay for child marriage. And that's why I did this response, because it will lead to harm to multiple children. It needs to be combated as much as we possibly can. With that, I'm going to close out now, just under 3 hours, unless you guys have any questions you want me to cover. But for the most part, it's very clear that Daniel has failed to give any evidence child marriage is not harmful, that it's actually good, it's actually beneficial. He had to concede on certain points. They ignored all the psychiatric issues. And even the research they tried to combat, they didn't do a good job on. It was very easy to use their own studies against them. And I hope, if you run into any of Daniel's acolytes, just use this video to send to them. Good. Yeah, please rewatch, share it, let them know this is going on. I have no sympathy for people arguing for harm that will be caused to children. This needs to be combated every step of the way, and I will. Daniel never should have challenged me on this debate, because I'm not going to let him get away with this. This is pure evil. And also, you can't trust anything Daniel puts out anymore, because he basically said, anything that comes from the UN is bias and comes from feminism. Well, anything that comes from Muslim skeptic, don't trust anymore, because it obviously has biased roots, guys. Don't trust anything that I have to say. So thanks for coming, everyone. Share this around. I appreciate everybody coming. And I will continue to combat this more in the future if he wants to double down on this. And the more Daniel digs his heels on this, the worse it looks for him in the long run, because he keeps giving me more stuff I can use again. Yes, that's what it's about, and we need to stop it as much as possible. How do you prove to a Hebrew roots person Christmas trees aren't pagan? See my video, top 10 Christmas traditions and their origin, and I cover it there. All right. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you guys later.